Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was a sunny April. Spring is always associated with the beginning of new life. All people were looking forward to it this year because March was cold and the awakening of nature was delayed. But the news of this month amazed everyone. Everywhere in the newspapers, on TV and radio, they were talking about only one thing. Everyone from old grandmothers at the doorstep to pigeons flying over Washington was talking about this news. The Capitol was stunned by this event. And everything revolved around a famous businessman who decided to get married. But it would not have struck anyone if not for one strange circumstance. He had many marriages with stars, but this time it was different. The girl was a complete stranger to no one. No one knew her name or even her appearance. All the newspapers had a question mark drawn instead of her face. The media kept him on his toes. They kept watch over him day and night in the hope that when he came out, he would at least clear the air. Martin Newman was one of the most famous businessmen in the world. His company developed games, made a sensation years ago, and was still the main one on the market. He was loved by everyone from 15-year-old teenagers to men in their 40s. Of course, there were also girls among the audience, but still the majority of the audience were men who liked to play war games at the computer. Martin was known for his personal life to almost everyone. He'd been married to 3 celebrities from abroad, but now he'd surprised everyone. To marry someone unknown to any living soul seemed strange and irrational. No one knew who this mysterious girl was, who was so zealously hidden in his mansion. But where there is intrigue and mystery, there's interest. Society needs these mysteries. That's why this wedding was eagerly awaited by everyone. One journalist managed to get as close as possible to his house by passing the 3 guards at the gate. The house was, of course, outside the city. The businessman tried to solve almost all cases remotely, but it was a very dodgy reporter who, unfortunately, also failed. When Martin was leaving his house to get into his car, the reporter jumped out of the bushes and ran at him with all his legs. But he was immediately stopped by the guards. One of the thugs wanted to threaten the poor guy with a gun. He started to pull it out of his pocket, but Martin stopped him. "Let him through." "I will quickly answer," in a stern tone, the businessman told his guard. He obeyed and stepped back. The journalist immediately realized what he was doing and quickly pulled out a camera and a microphone. "Can you tell me the name of your fiancée? Just the name, please." Martin hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to understand whether to answer or not. But he decided to answer. "Her name is Agatha," he said, barely grinned enigmatically, and got into a car with tinted windows. The very next day, it was all over the news channels and newspapers. The world knew the name. And again, the discussion of the wedding, which was scheduled for May 15, began. Everyone was waiting for this event. Wanted to at least somehow get information about where the wedding of a famous businessman will be held. What guests are invited? Where will they go on their honeymoon? But Martin and his agents were silent. All questions of journalists remained unanswered. Only sometimes on the face of the businessman could be seen a slight smirk when he was asked about the bride. This only fueled the interest of the public. At the presentation of the new project, Martin, unfortunately, flooded with questions not about the purpose of his activities, but about marriage. He was beginning to tire of it. In the midst of the siege, which was arranged by journalists, the businessman made a sign to everyone with his hand to wait a minute and leaned over to his manager. Quietly asked him something. How could the reporters not strain their ears? They couldn't hear anything. The question was, what if she wakes up? Martin asked the manager he trusted like his mother. "Those are strong drugs." "Nothing will happen," he replied and winked at the chief. Finally, the cherished day arrived. The wedding was decided to be held in the very center. People crowded around the fence instead, trying to get a glimpse of the bride and groom. And then, accompanied by 3 escort cars, a Maybach with tinted windows drove up to Max. People were almost throwing themselves at the car, trying to see who was sitting there. But they failed miserably. They were dragged away by law enforcement. There was a commotion and a crush. After a few minutes, a Polak Martin got out of the car. He did not even look back and immediately went to the door of the registry office. But he was stopped by a photographer who pointed to the bride. He wanted to take a picture of them at the registry office. Happy and full of hope for a bright future. "You will only take pictures of what I say," rudely replied Martin. He pushed the guy away and entered the building, and the audience watched the bride's exit. But even here, they had no luck. The driver opened the door and helped the girl in the white dress stand up. As soon as the light fell on her face, everyone screamed with delight. Immediately, the discussion began. "Oh my God, she's so young. She must be marrying him for his money." They were talking in the crowd. "It's obvious she's a kept woman." Others responded. Amid all the shouting and yelling, the bride walked towards the building. She was accompanied by a guard with black glasses. She held onto his arm as if she feared she would fall. They walked very slowly. Someone in the crowd immediately said that she was handicapped, and everyone picked up on that. There were 1,000 cameras pointed at the poor girl. Everyone wanted to capture her face and her gait. The media was at the forefront of capturing every little detail to create new gossip. The public had to be fed new content, bread and spectacle. The motto of ancient Rome is always relevant, and the tabloids are doing a great job of it. Finally, the bride entered the registry office and the shouts of the crowd were left behind. Before her opened a stunning view of the high ceilings, framed, gilded stucco. At the top, a painting depicting angels could be seen. Everything suggests it's a place of peace. But the bride didn't feel that way. She felt rather strange in general. This was noticed by the guests as well. They also managed to notice her incredible beauty. The girl was very slender and young. In appearance, she was not more than 25. Among the guests on the groom's side were his colleagues or some influential people in business. On the bride's side, there were only 2 bridesmaids who were sitting on chairs and chatting. Everyone was waiting for the ceremony to begin. This bride was acting very strangely, not talking to anyone. She's standing in the corner looking down at the floor. "After all, it's her wedding," said one of the guests of the celebration. It was a woman named Lily, who also had a similar company. Only they developed games not for computers, but for mobile devices. And they have the right audience. Mostly people over 50 and don't talk. Rumor has it that this is the model he brought back from Australia. She doesn't know the language. Maybe that's why she doesn't talk to anyone and acts so quiet, her neighbor replied. "Really?" Another woman joined the conversation. "I'm sure it's his niece, maybe even his cousin. He's had feelings for her for a long time. But with his parents alive, of course, he couldn't marry her. It would be a disgrace. And now that his parents are dead, he can finally do it. How awful." Lily marveled. "And where did you get this information?" "I have my own connections," answered about the woman Morris. She just explained to them the origin of this girl, and they do not believe her. What kind of outrage is this? What if the groom himself approached them? "Oh, dear Martin, it's so good to see you at last," Lily exclaimed, shaking his hand. "Good afternoon. It's very nice to see you all here as my guests. I hope everything is satisfactory. Of course. We were just discussing you. We're so happy for you. But Martin, tell me, why the secrecy?" One of the women laughed. "Will you never reveal your girlfriend's identity to us?" "I'm madly in love with her," the businessman exclaimed sharply. It was as if he had rehearsed this phrase for a long time. That's why it sounded a bit fake. So as soon as I met her, I decided to make her my wife. "I hope the bride doesn't mind," the other woman joked. Martin looked at her strangely and without replying, walked away with his head held high. As if the phrase he had just said offended him very much. They were a strange couple, Lily summed up. Rumors were going from extreme to extreme. But the fact was the fact. The girl was unknown to anyone. She had come from nowhere. No one had ever seen her around Martin. No one knew how long they had been dating. Absolutely nothing was known. That's why the news of the wedding made the whole community so excited. It was a real sensation. It was Agatha who was too mysterious. She hadn't uttered a word since she got out of the car. No one knew what her voice was like. Was it melodious or rough? And how old was she? She looked very young. And she was marrying a man who turned 55 this year. All of this didn't connect in my head. While everyone was whispering and talking, waiting for the ceremony to begin, Agatha was led out of the hall to the right into the corridor. There they dragged her into a room, sat her in front of a mirror, and began to put her makeup in order. She was working right in the car. So correct me, that's all. In 15 minutes, the ceremony will begin, said Agent Martin, and left the room, leaving the girls alone. Agatha was not feeling well. She saw everything through a veil, as if she were in a dream. She stared at the mirror for a long time, trying to remember something. It was as if those facial features were alien to her. Her own face was not like her real one. She was like she was in a trance. The makeup artist did her amazing makeup and then put on a veil to cover her face. Like, "Baby, you're ready," smiled the makeup artist. "I hope you really love him." Badoma. And Agatha was pushed towards the door. She completely lost her bearings and didn't know where to go. But she knew the guard was guarding her at the door. He led the girl back to the hall where the ceremony was to be held. Agatha was literally pushed onto the white carpet, studded with rose petals. She almost collapsed on the floor. What amazed the guests. But the girl immediately recovered and, under the melodious music, went down the aisle with flowers. All eyes at this moment were directed at her. Many were judging. Many pretended to be happy, though no one, by and large, cared. They'd been invited here as a courtesy. Well, and to fill the hall is not good that a famous businessman is left without guests at the wedding. Agatha had time to look around the hall. There were people in black on every corner. They all folded their arms and stood like real guards waiting for an attack. Finally, the girl came to the altar. Martin was already waiting for her there. He stood with a very serious look and from time to time slightly bent his knees from excitement. Agatha stood opposite him. At that moment she felt dizzy, but she did not show it. "Hello, honored guests. Hello, dear newlyweds." The woman greeted the guests, registering the marriage. "Especially the husband is very young," joked one of the guests, but he was immediately silenced. The others ignored the ridiculous joke. Today is the legal marriage of couples whose love has struck a chord with many. The registrar continued. "Dear Agatha and Martin," she addressed the couple standing next to her. "Today is the most beautiful and unforgettable event in your life. Today you are creating a young family. Creating a family is the beginning of a good union of two loving hearts. From this day you will go through life hand in hand, together experiencing the joys of happy days and sorrows. Observing the solemn rites before the state registration of marriage. Please answer, is your desire to be married? Is it free, mutual, and sincere? Are you ready not only to create a friendly and strong family, but also to preserve it and give a decent upbringing to your future children? I ask you to answer." Groom. The man, not thinking long, took Agatha's hands and looking into her eyes said, "Yes, I ask you to answer bride." The girl turned to Agatha. The bride was embarrassed. All this seemed to her like a strange dream. In her memory flashed some fragments of the past, which confused her very much. She saw neither her chosen one nor her fiancé in the world, but under his intense, heavy gaze. She nevertheless answered in a zombified voice. Yes, the registrar smiled happily and then proceeded to perform her duties by your mutual consent in the presence of your witnesses and guests. Please exchange rings and sign your signatures. Martin gently took Agatha's hand and placed the gold ring on her ring finger. The bride did the same. The registrar just stepped back and pointed them to the papers. Lying on a beautiful marble table, a black pen lay next to them. "Now sign your signatures," joyfully exclaimed the woman. The couple bent over the deed book. But suddenly from behind there was the sound of a door opening, and then someone's swift running. Everyone turned around, including the newlyweds, and they saw a little girl who ran across the hall so fast that the guard could not catch up with her. The child ran to the reception desk and hugged Agatha tightly. She did not understand anything. Meanwhile, the girl hugged her tightly as if she had found her long-lost mother. "Security," Martin shouted. "Do your job." Huge men in black suits ran up to the girl and began to chain her away from the bride. The girl resisted. She was small, about 6 years old at most, but impossibly strong and a mom. "That's my mom." The girl screamed as hard as she could, struggling against these men in black glasses. One she kicked with her foot in the groin, and he immediately fell to his knees in pain. The other was pulling her legs. So the girl just jerked her foot, and the man fell with her shoe. "Mommy, wake up, it's me." "Your daughter," Mommy broadcast the girl, asking for the girl in the dress. "Please, Mommy Olekshka, remember me." She was trying to remember something, but she couldn't do anything. She didn't recognize that girl, no matter how much she wanted to. There was no way she could remember. Then the child pulled her white dress up so the bride leaned over and hugged her tightly around the neck and kissed her cheek. That kiss, like a fairy tale, dispelled all the fog. The woman's memory began to clear. Agatha was now completely sure that this was her daughter. To think it was her Rose, her baby girl. Where had she come from? Who are all these people? She looked at her pseudo-fiancé. He was standing there furious. He was burning with anger. His fingers were clenched into a fist. It was like he was about to punch someone. As soon as all the memories came flooding back, tears flowed from Agatha's eyes. She squatted down and hugged her daughter tightly. "Little Rose is my darling." It was a very tender moment, which unfortunately was interrupted by the bass of Martin's guard removing the baby. The guards had already recovered from the baby girl's marriage and started pulling her away again. This time they managed to snatch the baby out of the mother's hands. The girl yelled, "What is the urge?" tried to break free, but everything was to no avail. Who is she against, these huge thugs? "Let go of my child." Screaming at Agatha. "Somebody please call the police." All the guests were just shocked at what was happening. Like the marriage registrar herself in her experience, this was the first marriage that had gone completely wrong. "Rose." Agatha screamed, but no one was doing anything about it. Then she jumped up to her fiancé and started shaking him as hard as she could, clutching at his shoulder. "Will you order them to let them go, Rose Ashol?" The girl hissed angrily. "You shouldn't call me that." "Oh, you shouldn't." With a sly smirk, Martin. He pushed his wife away, and she fell right on top of the guard, who immediately grabbed her. No matter how much she kicked, it was completely pointless. Martin's bodyguard held her firmly in his arms. What kind of lawlessness was this? Did the guests start to get indignant and get up from their seats? "No one is leaving here." Martin shouted across the room. The wedding continues. The guests ignored him. No one was enjoying the show anymore. It smelled fried, but a sudden gunshot made them stop and sit back in their seats. Yes, Martin had to resort to this method of crowd control as well. I repeat, the wedding is in progress. He glared at Shu's terrified registrar and made her put the papers back. Then he beckoned to himself, who forcefully held Agatha down. She was terrified of what was happening. She was sobbing with fear and hatred. Martin signed the document and handed the pen to the bride. She looked at the man with such hatred that he even smirked, thinking that he had won. But he was very wrong. Agatha was not the timid type, not one to give up so easily. She picked up a pen, but instead of using it to make a scrawl on the paper, sharply stuck the thin rod into the stomach of the guard who was holding her. The pen was expensive steel, and so thin, it actually went into that piece of muscle like a sword. The man shrieked in pain and folded himself in half. Agatha ripped off her veil, slashed the man who was holding her poor child across the face with her fist, grabbed Rose by the arm and ran away on her way, managing to tear off the hem of her fairy dress. Running was now comfortable. Whirlwind, she ran out of the building, and 1,000 cameras were immediately pointed at her and her daughter. Reporters, like animals, pounced on the girl with questions. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. "Agatha, what happened? How do you comment on it?" someone asked. The girl was darting from side to side, trying to figure out where the exit from the registry office was. Martin's men were already running out and trying to catch her. She was screaming, asking people for help, but everyone just filmed her on their mobile cameras and iPads, trying to take as many photos and videos of the scandal as possible. She felt like a circus animal that was now performing in the arena. The girl couldn't believe what was happening. She just couldn't get her head around it. Why do people behave like this? And this very head was hurting more and more every minute. But the girl did not give up and wanted to climb over the temporary fence. But then the guard Martin grabbed her by the waist. He easily lifted her as if she weighed as much as a bruise, and carried her and the baby to the car. Agatha squealed, slapping him on the back. Rose was biting and turning and generally helping as best she could. But the man didn't care. He was walking firmly and confidently. The back door of the car had already been opened in front of him. As the guard approached the car, he threw the girl and child off him and pushed her into the passenger compartment. But Agatha, though seemingly weak, actually had good physical fitness. She did not fall on the seat and held on. Then the already angry guard began to literally shove her into the cabin. She resisted with all her might. Suddenly, everyone heard sirens wailing. It was getting closer and closer. And then someone said on the loudspeaker, "No place. Everybody stay in your seats." Aha! Saw a cop pushing a security guard away from Martin. Looks like somebody called the cops after all. The guard was outraged by this behavior, but obeyed and stepped back to them. A furious Martin came running up. He was just furious and looked at everyone with such a look, as if he wanted to spear everyone with his eyes. What's going on here? How dare you invade another part of the territory? He was indignant, addressing the policeman. We're here on a call, and I can see that we did not come in vain. The sergeant replied confidently, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Martin kept yelling. Then the policeman was silent for a moment. It was like he realized his mistake. "I'm sorry, but I just needed to already," less confidently said the policeman. "What to ruin my wedding? Please understand, I'm just doing my duty." While the two were trying to work things out, Agatha kicked out between the guard and them and went unnoticed. Thanks to the police car, there was a hole in the partition. It was through it that the girl wanted to get through. She took her daughter and rushed to the fence. She almost reached the gap through which it was possible to get through, but she was stopped by someone's strong male hand, which laid on her shoulder. She turned around and saw a rather young policeman, a regular sergeant in his uniform. "Where are you going, citizen?" he asked her sternly. Though from his lips it was not scary, but rather funny. He was a very nice man who tried to portray himself as a serious and brave fighter. He was very young. He had probably just been hired for the job. Agatha stopped. You looked at him with pitying eyes and whispered, "Please let go. I can't let you do that." The sergeant answered confidently. "But don't you feel sorry for a poor mother with a small child in her arms? Do you really want to give us to the sharks?" "What sharks?" "The girl?" The policeman replied haughtily. "Please." She folded her hands in peace. "He will ruin me and my daughter too." Then the sergeant couldn't stand it any longer. At last, the mask of a serious and self-confident man came off. Now only sympathy could be seen on his face. Agatha did not interfere and took advantage of this moment and put her daughter next to her. She approached the boy and whispered softly in his ear, "I'm going to pretend to use violence against a police officer." The sergeant even pulled away from her. He was embarrassed by the tone with which she said it. He looked at her. Agatha looked like a puppy, praying for help. The policeman stood in silence for a few seconds, then nodded, and while Martin and the other sergeant sorted out their rights, Agatha pretended to resist, threw herself into the policeman's arms, and began to thrash as hard as she could. He played along, trying to hold on. Everyone turned around at their altercation, and noticing this, the girl knocked the poor sergeant in the stomach with a sharp heel. He collapsed to the floor, though it was clear from his face that he was in no pain at all. He was only feigning pain. Agatha was very happy about this, as she didn't want to hurt anyone. At this time, a backup in the form of the surgeon's colleague was already running towards them. He ran up to his partner and helped him up. A few seconds later, Agatha was tied up by two other policemen, and her daughter Rose was taken by the hand and led away. The situation was heating up. Martin finally approached them. "Let my fiancée go," he ordered in a tone that left no room for disobedience. It should be noted that although he was a powerful man, but he was not lucky with his height. He was only 165 centimeters tall, and the commands from his mouth sometimes sounded very funny, especially when he was addressing a tall or clean-cut guy like this policeman. If any of his subordinates let his short stature be mentioned in any way, he would be immediately fired or stripped of his bonus. Martin hated that flaw in himself. Fortunately, for him, money did the job, and everyone, by and large, cared only about the size of his wallet. And now the answer of one of the policemen made him terribly angry. No, it wasn't said in words. It was just that one of the policemen, who kept his hands, richly tied, laughed. Then Martin came up to him and hissed through his teeth with an angry look, threatening him with his finger. "You're laughing, asshole. You're laughing." Then the policeman immediately removed the smile from his face. He caught the murderous stare of his superior. "I'm going to fire the hell out of this place," Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. "I'm going to ask you to calm down." Martin calmly said he know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too. Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides. Thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. "Are you going to pay for this?" He said, stopping at every word. "And you?" He pointed at Agatha. "A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me." "Understood." Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? "When?" "Take her away," the irascible businessman asked impatiently. "Tomorrow morning," replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now. But still, she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. "I'm going to fire the hell out of this place," Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly, they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. "I'm going to ask you to calm down." Martin calmly said he know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too. Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides. Thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. "Are you going to pay for this?" He said, stopping at every word. "And you?" He pointed at Agatha. "A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me." "Understood." Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? "When?" "Take her away," the irascible businessman asked impatiently. "Tomorrow morning," replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now. But still, she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. It seemed to him that a tear rolled down her cheek, but he didn't think it was necessary to pay much attention to it. The girl had an overabundance of emotion. It was an understandable reaction. Besides, in a couple of hours her stories and face would be all over the news channels. What kind of scandal would play out? But that would come later. And now they were driving under a passport gray sky, which mourned all the sorrows of the day. By the way, you have not introduced yourself, informed the girl with some semblance of a smile. After a few minutes of silence, Tim also with a smile answered the guy he clearly liked where this dialogue leads. The girl only nodded. She did not give her name. So the surgeon had to feel awkward asking the question. I told you my name. Would you like to tell me yours? No, Agatha answered tiredly. She was surprised at her own reactions. After everything she had been through, she could still communicate so calmly and even make jokes. Nothing. The sergeant smiled. I'll find out at the station. You can't hide anything from me there. They drove up to a building as gray as the Sutton weather. It was the police station. Agatha didn't want to get out of the warm car into the pouring rain. But she had to. Tim opened the back door of the car and offered her his hand, forgetting that the girl was handcuffed. She even grinned. Such forgetfulness of the guy, and he still somehow got her out of the car and led her into the building. Of course, he didn't have an umbrella, but he didn't need one. The lot was 5 meters away from them. The building was 3 stories high with lights on in almost every window. But it was the lowest floors that were the most stressful, the semi-basement behind bars and windows that looked out just a little bit. Agatha secretly hoped she was being led to the wrong place. But the line of her inner plea was not heard. Tim took her exactly to the basement. She didn't want to go down there, and the guy seemed to notice that. Oh, it's not a prison. Nothing will happen to you, he reassured her and led her down a special dark staircase. When they arrived at the place, Agatha looked around. There were about 5 cameras in total, and only one of them had some girl in a black miniskirt sitting in it. She clearly looked special and with low social responsibility. Tim asked Agatha to take a seat on the bench, and he himself went to the table where his boss was sitting. He was a very overweight man in his mid-40s. He was holding a real cigar in his hands, huffing like a steam engine, filling out some documents by the light of a dim desk lamp. Good afternoon. Peter brought the girl from that wedding. I suppose you've already been informed. The formidable man looked at him sidelong. He clicked his tongue and rolled his eyes. Yes, my daughter was brought here. She was taken to another ward. He answered indifferently. Which ward? How far from here? Tell me? Agatha exclaimed in tears, approaching the chief's desk. Lady, can you keep your temper? The mustachioed man was indignant. Tim came to the rescue. He took Agatha aside and calmly explained to her, don't worry, your daughter is safe. She is on the 2nd floor where they keep street children. Tomorrow she will be dealt with by custody. No, they'll take her. Martin owns everyone in this town. Please don't give her up, Agatha begged. Tim, come here. I found her papers, said the warden. Tim looked at the girl with a smile and then turned around and walked back to the desk. Agatha's 25-year-old daughter has no daughter. Well, further you will familiarize yourself, ordered mustachioed uncle, and then sharply stood up from the table, although the concept of sharply for him was not suitable. His stomach was so huge that when he rose from the chair, he moved the table a couple of centimeters forward. He took his cigar with him and pronounced, pointing at Tim, You all stay on duty, and I've got to go. After these words, he took another look around his favorite basement and then walked toward the stairs. His footsteps and readings could be heard until he stepped onto the flat surface on the 1st floor. Finally, Tim stayed here in charge. The guy walked up to Agatha and said, Now I have to take you to the cell. I'm sorry, you didn't apologize to me like that, said ironically a female voice on the right. It was the one who was now watching them with interest. Tim looked at her indifferently. Agatha only nodded. She didn't want to cause a scandal. That was the way it was supposed to be. And she was also pissed off by that upstart with the smeared makeup. When Tim led Agatha to the outermost cell, it then dryly spat after them. Agatha was shocked at this behavior, but tried to ignore it all. After all, Tim did. When he locked her in the cell, he went to the desk himself and began to study the documents. So, Agatha, and why is it written that there is no daughter? Marveled the guy. The girl wanted to answer, but then she was interrupted again from the neighboring cell. Donna walked because and did not want to admit. Then a vile laughter sounded. Here Tim could not stand it any longer, went up to this insolent blonde, looked at her with eyes burning with anger, and hissed through his teeth. One more word, dearie, and your temporary imprisonment here will turn into a permanent one. Believe me, I can make that happen. Oh, dearie, what are you going to do to me? The girl who laughed, the warden's giving you a command. You know who's running this, boss? Me too. That's why you're in the cage. Agatha joined the dialogue. And you shameful beggars didn't ask, but walked the child refused and still dares to arise, replied the blonde with pumped lips. How dare you bore? Agatha could not stand it. Tim sighed heavily. Then he reappeared in the dialogue. Then stop it, both of you. He growled menacingly. You turn to the girl of easy virtue. You will speak when asked clearly. Otherwise, every time I open my mouth, you will be fined for failure to observe public order. You will come out of here with debts that you can only pay off with loans. And you, Agatha, keep your temper, please. I'm asking you a question, answer, and don't lie, or it'll be worse. The blonde pouted her lips and sat down on the poplar tree in her cell. Agatha, on the other hand, simply nodded affirmatively. Tim sat back in his seat and continued his questioning. So where did the child come from? I will answer only to you in private. The girl answered confidently. Tim looked at her tiredly, then said, all right, then let's go to the meeting room. They will. It's like a miracle today, a real fairy tale, the blonde exclaimed. Tim looked at her menacingly, but said nothing. He was tired of arguing. In fact, he really wanted to sleep. The guy was completely unprepared for night duty. He hadn't gotten much sleep during the day because the neighbors with small children had been making noise all day. Either they were just mocking him, or they were really making repairs while killing the kids who were screaming like crazy. At least that's how it seemed to him. Tim came to work a wreck, and of course, by the end of the day his mood was completely gone. He and Agatha came into the meeting room. The girl still doubted that there were no more employees, and she would really be alone with Tim. If anyone listened to their conversation, it would surely reach Martin's ears. But what if Tim was working for him too? She thought about it as she walked down the stairs. She'd have to lie again, but it was a lie. Must look very truthful in some of the details of her story. Still have to come clean. They finally reached the room. Tim closed the door. There was a dim orange light burning in the room, only faces were recognizable. They both sat down and the guy started his questioning. So now tell me whose child this is, and if you are the mother, because all the documents say otherwise. I used to believe official records, but now they don't inspire confidence. Convince me otherwise, it's Rose. My daughter answered Agatha. But the thing is, these documents are forgeries. I mean, remember when you asked me in the car about being forced into marriage? Well, Martin didn't recognize my child from a previous marriage. He made me new papers, and they didn't include my Rose. No mention of a first spouse either. He made it look like they never existed. But how very hard is that to do for falsifying documents? I'll remind you again, this is Martin Newman, one of the richest and most powerful men in our country. You don't think he's capable of document fraud? Yeah, for him it's like drawing a circle on a piece of paper. Tim was thinking. He began to check the documents, but found nothing in them that hinted at forgery. But what about it? I think we should call the warden. He knows how to deal with cases like this. Will he help? No, the girl interrupted him. You don't understand, he controls all the brass, all the police, even the media. He can shut everyone up. Yeah, I'm not so sure you don't work for him too. Tim's last words made me literally cringe. It was like he was terribly offended by that statement. So you don't trust me? But Agatha hesitated. Tim got upset, shook his head as if to show how disappointed he was, and then said, well, okay, I won't call my superiors. But then what should I do? In what way? The girl didn't understand him. Martin will come back for you tomorrow. He'll bail you out and take you to the registry office again. Then you can forget about your daughter. She will be placed in an institution. Agatha's head snapped up. Where can she hide? Where to go? She'll sit in a cage like a trained macaque until morning. And then she would be taken away and forced to marry again. And she had absolutely no idea what means Martin would use this time Tim. Begrudgingly, she began. Help me escape from here. What from surprise? The boy exclaimed. No one had ever dared to make such an impertinent offer to him before. Please, how can I let you go? Are you out of your mind? No, I wouldn't risk my career for a dubious person trying to escape from her own wedding. If you are to marry him, then you will marry him. The boy answered firmly, though it was clear from his face that he didn't believe his own words at all. He just tried again to pretend to be an indifferent and rude boss. But deep down, he was still the same good and sympathetic guy. Agatha by Ace Book. Now she had lost all hope. Tim was right. If this was her destiny, then so be it. The policeman took the girl back to her cell. She was gloomier than a cloud. Tim said nothing to her and silently sat down at the desk to work. It was about 10 o'clock in the evening. The restless blonde was already asleep. Agatha lay silently staring at the ceiling for another hour. Different thoughts crossed her mind. She thought about her daughter, who had not even managed to do anything bad to anyone, and she was already forcibly separated from her parents. She thought about Martin, who was just a psycho, and it was obvious that after everything that had happened, he would take revenge. She reflected on how many lies had come off her lips, which he had told Tim about her bitter fate. Almost all of it had been lies. The boy glanced at her from time to time as he filled out the paperwork, but she continued to stare at the ceiling with a blank, broken look. After about 3 hours, Tim couldn't stand it any longer and approached the bars of Agatha's cell. She looked at him again with a painful, despairing look. And then Tim decided to do the terrible, terrible thing for his career of his life. It was a true miracle for the poor girl. He put the key into the lock and opened it. It fell to the floor with a clatter. Tim was startled. It was that the buxom blonde would wake up, but she was sleeping the dead sleep. The boy opened the creaking door and said in a whisper, "Come out." Agatha looked at him as if he were an angel from whom the light of hope and freedom emanated. She did not hesitate to step out into the open. Tim closed the cage and whispered, "Follow me. Follow all my instructions and we won't be noticed." The girl nodded understandingly and quietly followed her savior. They went up the stairs like mice, and when they reached the first floor, they heard someone's footsteps. Tim immediately pressed the girl against the wall and himself went to the floor. There passed his work colleague, who was on duty on the first floor. "About what and you left?" joyfully said his friend. "And he himself is not happy about it," answered Tim, going as far away from the stairs as possible, as if casually. "Listen, where's that little girl we brought back from the wedding today?" pensively mumbled the guy with a smirk. "The daughter of that stunning hottie." "Yeah, well, settle your fantasies already." "Where's the girl?" "She's probably asleep on the second one." "What do you want?" "The boss told me to talk to her, so I told Tim." "You picked a strange time to talk to a little girl." "Those are the orders." "You know, Peter, sometimes she talks a lot of crap." "Well, since she's asleep, I'll talk to her tomorrow morning." You, by the way, then early, interviewing her guardianship, wanted to take her away by 12. Dima noticed. "Okay, I'm off, since nothing else is going on. Time to hit the sack." "Come on." Tim smiled. They shook hands and went their separate ways. Tim walked towards the stairs as if he were going back to his basement. But in fact, he just wanted to make sure that Agatha hadn't died of a heart attack yet. After those words from his coworker, her daughter was supposed to be taken to the orphanage tomorrow. For a mother, this must be her worst nightmare. "Agatha," whispered Tim, "are you like Roseher?" "No, we won't let that happen," the boy answered confidently. Agatha swallowed, coming to her throat. Calm, and nodded uncertainly. Tim took her hand. The hand was as cold as a corpse's. "It's because the basement is very damp and cold," Tim thought with pity. It would be easy to get sick down there. They went further upstairs, and on the way they met no one else. Only an employee sleeping on a chair who was watching the children's ward, where the street children were kept until they were taken away by the guardianship. The man had dozed off, but could wake up at any moment. Tim prayed that door wasn't a cloud. He still had to get the keys in the keyhole. It seemed impossible. Heavy iron doors with a grated window. The guy realized there was no way around the distraction. He took Agatha aside and explained his plan. She supported him, and they began to act. The girl hid behind the information desk. Tim went up to the guard and touched his shoulder. He didn't wake up. Then the guy sighed and yanked him much harder. And only then the man woke up, slammed his eyes shut. He started looking around as if he didn't realize where he was. The man was completely disoriented in space and time. Sam exclaimed, "Tim, why did he fall asleep?" "I see, sorry." Colonel abruptly jumped up the man, presenting his hand to his temple. Only then did he realize he was talking to a regular sergeant. Tim rode, angry. "What are you going to do? And what are you doing at your desk?" "I'll tell the boss." "You're not a rat." "I know that for a fact. I'm not a rat. But if you want to keep sleeping, help me with the basement." "What's going on down there?" is Sam's less interested question. "Yeah, the batteries don't seem to be working. And you know it's still very cold. Especially in this fucking dungeon. I'll be in the hospital with pneumonia soon." "I don't know. I'm actually watching the kids here." "Oh, where are they going to go?" "You were asleep." "Come on. It'll only take 5 minutes just to figure it out. Give me a hand." I begged Tim. "All right." The man just took it off and followed his comrade downstairs. Tim also made a sign with his hand to Agatha as he left. Agatha made sure they had left and went to the door. She put the keys that Tim had given her in advance into the keyhole. The guy was lucky that his boss trusted him, so he gave him keys to all the departments and finally turned them. She entered a dark room, lit only by the warden's faint light. There were beds everywhere, but there were only 2 children in here, and one of them was her Rose. Agatha recognized her blood at once. The girl was sleeping very soundly. The mother did not wake her daughter up and frighten her. She knew that Rose does not wake up even from the sound of thunder and any noise. So she was sure that the girl would not wake up when she took her in her arms. And she was right. The girl didn't even move when her mother picked her up. She carried her baby out, closed the door, and hid behind the information desk again. A few minutes later, Sam and Tim returned. "I told you it wasn't the wiring." Disgruntled, the little man said. "Who knew?" Tim answered in a feignedly sad voice. "No, you sure did. You're too young." Tim unfired. In the left, the man sat back in his seat and closed his eyes. "That's it. Tim, don't interfere with work," he said, realizing that the guy hadn't left yet. "Good night, Sam." Tim grinned. The man fell asleep quickly, and when Tim was finally sure, he called Agatha to him. She approached him on tiptoe, barely breathing and not making a sound. "Are you sure?" Tim asked confidently, opening the back door leading outside. The service exit for the dark alley employees, where everyone usually went down for a smoke. Agatha only nodded affirmatively. Then the guy opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the barely lit street. She turned around once more to say thank you with her eyes, and then she walked at a brisk pace, with the baby in her arms. But still, after a few seconds, Tim couldn't stand it and caught up with the girl. He was being pulled by some kind of force. He couldn't believe he was doing it himself, but now the guy actually felt some kind of concern for the 2 of them caught up in the jogging strap. He stopped her, touched her fragile shoulder. "Agatha, wait," he said almost in a whisper. The girl shuddered, turned around. There was consternation in her eyes and a maddening weariness. This night was definitely not for sleeping, but it was evident how weary she was. "Where are you going to go?" asked the boy. "Away from this place." Agatha replied indifferently. "You don't even know where to go." "I don't care. I just want to forget this story like a bad dream. I don't care if it goes to hell." Of course, she lied and lied about almost everything. No, she definitely had a plan. "Do you have a place to stay?" Tim asked. "No." "Do you have any money?" "No." After saying that, the guy was completely fenced in. It was as if he tasted victory, because he had already decided everything about himself the moment he let Agatha out of the cell. "Let me help you." Finally, shyly, Tim offered. Agatha looked him over from head to toe, then looked at Rose sleeping in his arms. She really had nowhere to hide right now. Martin would come in the morning and give chase. No matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't escape alone for sure. But you're risking your career. Maybe even your normal life. "If Martin catches us, we'll be eaten to death," the girl explained. "The cameras have already recorded everything. True, I've erased most of the footage from today. But anyway, I'm an accessory to this story now. And if I stay here, I'll be punished, of course. So I have nothing to lose. Let me help you." Agatha was silent. She did not understand why such generosity. But she didn't care about that now. All she cared about was where to hide. While she was pondering in one of the cars parked nearby, a horn sounded. She turned around. Tim was in it. "Did you want to walk?" he asked indignantly, lowering the window. Agatha shook her head. She went to the car, sat in the back, and tried to sag as low as possible in the seat so that she could not be seen. Her daughter squirmed in her arms and mumbled something in her sleep. Tim turned on the headlights and drove out of the parking lot. The police station slowly moved away from them. Then it disappeared behind the clutter of sleeping buildings of the huge night metropolis. After a few minutes, Agatha asked the logical question, "Where are we going? To my apartment?" Or was she thinking of hiding from that oppressive dwarf? In a different and dirty bride's dress, Agatha only grinned. All the rest of the way they drove in silence. After a while, the car stopped at a gray, unremarkable building. If it weren't for the window with a light on the second floor, one would think that the building had been abandoned for a long time. So dirty and neglected was the facade and everything around it. Tim parked the car, and Agatha ventured to ask, without hiding her surprise, "Do you live here?" "Yes," he smiled embarrassedly. "I rent. But trust me, it's not as bad on the inside as it is on the outside." Tim got out of the car and opened the back door. Taking Rose in his arms, Agatha surprisingly easily trusted him with her daughter. Animal instinct told her that this simple guy posed no threat. He seemed remarkably honest and reasonable. Up close, the building looked even lousier. Some of it had peeled off and needed paint. Some of it was decorated with scarlet graffiti. The young men climbed the rain-wet stairs. Apparently the roof leaked somewhere and smelled of mold and dust. Finally, Tim opened the door to the entryway. It was pitch black inside. You could see absolutely nothing. But Tim didn't seem surprised at all. He stepped back a little and pressed the elevator button, an indicator that showed the floor. It was possible to navigate, and Agatha, too, moved toward the glowing displays. They went up to the top floor. It was almost as dark there, but the faint light of the street lamps still penetrated through the narrow, dusty window. While Tim was opening the door, Agatha touched Sunflower on the small windowsill. The pot fell and shattered. The boy looked at her with a stern and judgmental look. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. It was finally possible to enter the apartment. The light blinded Agatha's eyes, and she could not get used to it for a long time. Light after darkness was a new source of pain in her tormented head. She looked around the apartment. As expected, the rooms were rather shabby, and there was only one bedroom. A typical Khrushchev one-bedroom apartment for a single bachelor. In the kitchen, Agatha noticed a cockroach running around the table looking for food. She almost shrieked with horror. After all, she had always been afraid of these insects. "Oh, to something. It's Valurka. He has long lived here with me," calmed her hospitable host. "You give names to cockroaches." Agatha was amazed. "When you live alone, you can think of many," Tim grinned. He sat down on a chair at the kitchen table and gestured to his companion to do the same. But she looked around in fright, as if searching for someone where Rose was. Loudly and desperately she asked, "Hush, hush, don't shout. I put your daughter in my bed while you were looking around. Don't worry, there are no cockroaches on the couch." I looked into his blue eyes to make sure he wasn't lying. And only then could I sit down at the table. "Your name, right? Not Agatha." For so suddenly he had dumbfounded her with the question. Her heart raced, for what he had just said was absolutely true. She looked at him with eyes round with shock. I began, but Tim interrupted her. "Don't lie to me. Please." The girl fell silent. She hesitated to tell him the whole truth or not. On the one hand, he was a policeman who could easily turn her into the authorities. On the other hand, he helped her escape, took care of her daughter, and brought her home, risking everything. Those actions did inspire confidence. Agatha pondered for a moment longer, though she had long since made up her mind. And then she answered, "Yes, you're right. Say your real name, Emma." The guy, leaning on the back of the chair, either it was a gesture of fatigue or distrust. "Emma it is," he said thoughtfully. "Who came up with that? His father always had a fetish, but borrowed names." The girl was silent for a while, then inquired, And how did you know that Agatha was not my real name? I just compared the two facts. The tattoo on your left arm speaks for itself, you know. Emma looked at her tattoo. It was in beautiful handwriting, spelled out in her name, though in English. It was a tattoo she had gotten back when she was 16, secretly from her parents. All because she argued with her friends. Yeah, and she kept doing it. You can't forge documents without changing your name. So it all really came together. Yes, you have talent I do not deny. Smiled at the guy. You'll have tea. The girl looked at him with eyes full of surprise. Sorry, I'm not taught manners, but according to me, guests are always offered tea, said Tim. Emma nodded and stared at the wall. The two demons of whether or not to speak were fighting in her again. There's something I haven't said yet, she began, or rather, I lied to you about almost everything. Everything? About what exactly? Tim asked calmly, pouring tea. About how I ended up here. The thing is, my husband isn't dead, and I don't have any aunt who wants to marry me off. Then who are you? I'll tell you, only you sit down. The boy was worried and sat down on a chair opposite the girl. It was 6 months ago. It had begun. October then stood surprisingly warm, but a fine rain we grew almost every day. Wet yellow and purple leaves lay everywhere on the path. Emma and Alex were walking in the park, and their daughter was collecting beautiful leaves for a herbarium. Mommy, look how many I've collected. Rose shouted with joy. Well done, Sonny. Let's finish up. We'll go to meet your grandfather soon, said Emma. Daughter's fault. They played in the park for half an hour before heading to a restaurant nearby. Emma's father had invited them there. He hadn't seen his granddaughter for lunch in a long time and wanted to see her one last time before he left on a business trip to another country. He was a terrific journalist. He was always being invited to different countries for reports or interviews. The family walked up to a beautiful restaurant with panoramic windows that looked out directly onto a small lake. They were met by a friendly receptionist and led to the right table. Michael, Emma's father, was already seated at it. Grandpa willed Rose, throwing herself into the arms of the sturdy seventh man. The man even lifted the little girl in his arms. She laughed merrily with joy. Emma and Alex came up to them as well. Hi, Dad. With a smile said the girl and kissed her father on the cheek. Alex shook his hand. Everyone sat down at a large table covered with a white, crisp tablecloth. Darling, you look marvelous today. It's a milk dress. It suits you very well, Michael remarked. The daughter smiled in appreciation. Today, she had received 1,000s of admiring looks and compliments on her look. She always looked amazing. The shiny, brown, very thick hair alone. For what it was worth, the shimmering jewelry in her ears, on her fingers, and on her chest harmonized with her outfit. Her husband was proud that he had gotten such a beautiful and intelligent woman. Finally, they placed the order. They began to talk to each other. So why did you invite us? Emma asked her father with a smile. He was a little embarrassed by such a direct question, but still answered, I wanted to see my granddaughter. And also to invite you to something else. Where to? Alex asked with interest. The thing is that I'm leaving soon, and the other day I met an old friend here. You'd be surprised because you've probably heard the name Martin Newman. Polyakov almost choked with admiration. Alex, Emma's husband, was also not averse to playing with adult toys. And in principle, this name was on everyone's tongue, yes, summed up Michael. We've been friends since university. Well, we haven't seen each other for a few years. The other day I was passing by some office and he came out. He recognized each other at once. We exchanged pleasantries, and I told him about my upcoming trip. Everyone listened to him with bated breath. He knows one of the richest and most famous people in the country, and we were definitely already stunned by such a surprise. Well, I invited him to celebrate our meeting to our daksha, Michael continued. And with you, my daughter, we have not talked for a long time. That's why I'm inviting you. The couple looked at each other. They were pleasantly pleased with this proposal. I think we can all get together this weekend. Finally, Emma replied. Her husband nodded his approval. But then they decided to wait for you at the cottage this Saturday, Michael said. He was delighted that the whole family would be together. And his old friend was coming too. Already on Friday, everyone started to get ready for the cottage. "Honey, where did you put my blue shirt?" asked Alex from the other room. Emma answered the laundry, dressing my daughter in pajamas. Alex came into the room with the laundry. "What am I going to wear tomorrow?" He was indignant. "Don't you have any more shirts?" Nervously replied the wife. "In the white one I'll look stupid, as if I want to show off in front of this Martin." "Isn't that what you want?" Emma said with a chuckle. The offended husband pouted his lips and slammed the door loudly. The girl laughed. Her husband's behavior was like that of a little boy who wanted to impress some girl. Emma put Rose to bed and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. She was already uncomfortable. She felt hot and cold. Her head rattled as if she'd been hit with rocks. The woman poured herself a glass of water and wrapped herself in the capital. It was at this time that Alex walked into the kitchen. He found a shirt that was to his liking and wanted to show off to his wife, but she didn't seem to care. And it's okay, he was worried. Just whether his wife knew or not. "I feel really bad." She held her hands to her temple and rubbed her head. Nothing helped. "Are you sick or what?" asked the worried husband. "I don't know. Anyway, you can't cancel anything tomorrow. Father will be offended. I'll drink a fever reducer now. Hope it helps. Let's just call Michael and tell him we can't make it. You're his daughter. Wouldn't he understand? Especially if you suddenly gave him an infection before the trip. That's the kind of thing that'll make him resent you." Emma was silent. She looked down at the floor and thought about something for a long time. "No, we're going. Rose really wanted to go, and so do you. I don't want to upset her. It's just a common cold. I just wore an open coat yesterday," she finally said. "Well, I'm not going to argue with you. It's your decision. If anything, you'll lose it tomorrow at the cottage. Right?" "Yes, honey," Emma smiled. That's when they came to a final decision. The whole night Emma had nightmares. Her temperature was already 38 degrees. She decided not to tell her husband. He might not let her go. She wanted to spend time with her father and her family. The next morning, she felt better. Emma was even able to make her family a delicious breakfast of pancakes with condensed milk. "How are you feeling?" asked Alex as they sat at the table. "Good. I feel better already. But I think I'll have to stay home tomorrow," answered Emma. "We'll arrange that," he promised. He hugged and kissed his beloved. Reluctantly, they packed their things and left the house. The journey amounted to 2 hours. They listened to music, talked, sang, played word games, and generally felt perfectly happy. Finally, they arrived at a wooden 2-story house in the old Russian style. Michael met them on the porch. "Daughter, at last," he marveled. "You are as beautiful as ever." And he was right. This day was no different from any other, because the subject always looked beautiful. Despite what she wore from her mother, she had inherited a perfect sense of style. Today, she was wearing a soft blue dress with a white scarf going on top of the accessory. She looked like a real lady. As Michael walked them into the house, he said, "I marvel at you. You have a husband, a small child, a whole carload of responsibilities, and you still manage to look after yourself. Your daddy raised you right. That's a father. But I gotta tell you, that's not the point. It's just that I got a loving husband and an obedient child. That's the secret." The grown-up daughter smiled slyly, looking at her husband half-turned. She saw a faint smile on his face. It was very flattering for him to hear such words from his own wife. Martin was already waiting for them in the house, sitting at the large dining table and pulling up a beer from his mug. He didn't look like a rich man at all. He was dressed quite plainly in an ordinary black sweater jeans, but he had a great haircut. As soon as he saw the guests, he was showered with compliments, especially on the subject of "Oh, ma'am." "You look stunning," he said, kissing her hand. This European etiquette surprised Emma very pleasantly. Her husband, on the other hand, did not like it very much. He immediately took his wife under his arm and led her to the opposite side of the table. False side of the table. "Yes, that's my little girl. You saw it," Michael bragged. "It sure is." Martin stretched out, looking at the angel on the ground. Emma noticed his gaze and smiled, but was a little embarrassed by the attention. Maybe she shouldn't have dressed up like that, but she always looked very stylish. And with her looks, she was always the center of attention. Rose had already run to her room where a lot of toys were waiting for her. On top of that, her grandfather had given her a whole dollhouse. "Mom, we will take this house home," asked the girl. Mom tugged at the sleeve of her dress. "Honey, you come here often enough as it is. Why should we take it with us?" strictly answered the mother. I want to. The girl wouldn't stop. "But we'll give in," and her said already Michael with a smile asked you, "Daughter, your apartment is not small. Put it somewhere." Emma nodded and Rose immediately left her and ran to the second floor to play with her new gift. "Oh, those children," with a smile said Martin. "Do you have children?" Emma asked, stroking her husband's hand. "No," he smiled. "I didn't have a family. It was never going to work out." He sighed a little pretentiously. "At 45, I am still a bachelor." Unfortunately, such a career cannot docket with a personal life. It's up to you what's best for you. "You're right," Alex answered firmly. He looked at Martin with a hateful look, which was very frightening. "We chose family and we don't regret anything." "And I'm very happy for you," Martin answered. There was a tension in the room. To ease the tension, Michael suggested that they go for a walk around the neighborhood. They went outside. His summer house was located in a rather large village, and the inhabitants of this village 30 years ago planted a beautiful avenue of different species of trees. There was a lot of wedge, so there were empty leaves growing, lying around at every step. "So what do you do, Martin?" asked Emma at last. She held her husband's hand, and the couple walked slowly down the alley. "A little bit of everything. My main business is computer games. I created a company that produces new games. They're very popular. Oh, it would be cool to play." Emma marveled politely at one of them. She glanced over at Alex. He was walking glum and grim as a freight sky. "Yes, Alex." She turned to him. He nodded. "That's a great idea. We'll play tonight in the company of such a beautiful lady." "It will be lovely," Martin replied. With a meaningful smile, Emma replied with the same joyful expression. There was only one thing bothering her. Emma didn't understand his behavior. He was so eager to meet Martin, and now he was dirtier than a cloud. While Martin and Michael went on chatting about their own things, the girl stopped her husband and took him a little aside. "What's going on?" In a whisper, she asked him, giving Alex a stern look. "I have nothing going on, but you and Martin have something interesting going on." He muttered offensively. "How old are you?" Emma couldn't take it anymore and started whispering angrily. "What are you talking about? I'm only being polite. You should learn some manners from him too, shouldn't you? I haven't heard a single compliment from you in a month." "I've heard plenty from other people," cynically replied the husband. "Well, you know, Alex," Emma gritted her teeth and pushed her husband with her shoulder. She went out into the alley and ran to catch up with Michael and Martin. They stopped, as they were obviously waiting for the couple. Emma waved her handkerchief and made a happy expression, though deep down she wanted to cry. Why did she have such an unattentive husband? She'd had so many suitors, but she'd chosen him. Yes, he's a terrific father, but as a husband, he's always been passive, cowardly, and the little things. Every purchase that was meant for Emma, she paid for it herself. Alex couldn't be expected to do anything, or he had a debt to pay, or the wrong time, or some other apocalypse. Emma was getting tired of it, but there were advantages to the marriage. First of all, the wonderful pedigree and genetics. Rose was smart beyond her years, and she was beautiful. Secondly, not everyone could afford a house in the city center, but thanks to Alex, it was possible. Not that Emma married him for the money, but for true love. It didn't smell like it. Some people will say, "How can you marry at 18?" And they'll say you can. But with age, preferences can change. There's nowhere else to dress. Divorce will hurt the baby. Your whole life will go down the drain. So Alex, we tried to maintain an even relationship with each other, although often there were domestic quarrels between them. "Where do you disappear, dear Emma?" Martin asked. "We've missed you already." "I'm sorry, for God's sake." She started to justify herself to my husband. She turned around to look for support, but Alex was gone. Fell into a ditch. Martin finished for her, laughing. I don't know, Emma said thoughtfully, trying to hide the tears that came to her eyes. They walked for another half an hour. During this time, they discussed fishing, career, family. In general, everything that could be discussed. It was getting close to evening, and dinner wasn't ready yet. Everyone had to go back to the house to start the preparations. Emma took over the chicken with the two soldiers. Martin volunteered to help cut up the groceries. Alex was nowhere to be seen. Emma asked her daughter where her father had gone, but she said she hadn't seen him since they had come in here. It wasn't like him, but there was nothing to be done. Salads don't make themselves. You can cook too. Emma marveled. When Martin helped her make the sauce for the chicken, that's a very strange misconception. Did you know that millionaires can't cook? Martin grinned. It's the cooks who make everything for them. I lived a very ordinary life as a child. And in my student years, I made such culinary masterpieces in the dormitory. Why did you ask your father? He admired them the most, Martin said with a laugh. Liar, you bastard. He went into the kitchen. Michael? No, I won't argue. Your pasta was really good, but the pizza. Did you kill her? The man. It wasn't my fault, it was the oven. Justified the famous businessman. All three of them laughed out loud. They didn't like Martin's company. It was an adult, self-confident person who was ready to tease and laugh at himself, not her Alex, to whom you say a word, and then you have to open the window from his heartfelt remarks. But it should be noted that Martin attracted Emma not as a man, but rather as an older relative. Let's say a jolly uncle, almost a brother to her father. He was positive, friendly, and caring. When Emma had another headache, he kindly offered her some imported pill that was supposedly very good. She regarded the gesture as a sign of politeness and courtesy, but Martin seemed to think otherwise. He repeatedly tried to touch her hand, catching her eye, giving her frank compliments. Eventually, Emma began to tense up, but she put it down to the amount of alcohol she had drunk. The wine they consumed while preparing dinner. Quite a lot indeed. Alex came in when they were finishing dinner. Rose had long since gone to bed. Oh, Alex cheerfully greeted him with a tipsy Emma. So where have you been? My darling, we've already moved on to dessert. Alex looked at everyone with a disgruntled look and stopped his number. He looked at him as if he was about to throw a knife at him and kill him. Yes, indeed, you've been on something of a bender. Laughed the businessman, who was terribly drunk. And then Alex saw what he expected and feared. Martin stroked Emma's knee. She took his hand away every time, and he put his palm on her leg again and again. The woman only smiled politely. She wasn't as drunk as this millionaire and realized he was doing something wrong. As soon as Alex saw these signs of attention from Martin, immediately rushed across the table to this underhatch. He hooked his arms around his neck, causing both of them to collapse on the floor. Emma screamed and urged her father to intervene, who was also drunk and struggling to comprehend what was happening. A real fight broke out between Martin and Alex. They began to beat each other right on the floor. But of course, Alex won, because he was completely sober, which is not to say that Martin is much younger than his opponent. The businessman's broken nose was bleeding. Emma screamed louder and louder. Alex lost his shattered fist. At this point, Michael had already woken up and rushed to separate the fighters at the screams. Frightened Rose. As soon as the girl saw this outrage, she too screamed thinly and loudly. Emma ran up to comfort the poor little girl. She took her to the second floor and tried to put her to sleep again. Mom, Uncle Martin, he's alive, Rose asked fearfully. Of course, he just had a bad fall. And Dad and your grandpa are trying to help him now, lied Emma with a smile. She felt a throbbing pain in her head. Her temperature seemed to be rising again. Whether it was from the stress she had been under or some other reason, the process had intensified. After 10 minutes, Rose was finally able to doze off. When her mother was sure of this, she left the room and carefully closed the door. Downstairs, everything was quiet. Emma was afraid to go back downstairs. She was afraid of seeing something else scary. The first floor was as quiet as a graveyard. It was frightening and intriguing at the same time. Emma walked downstairs and into the dining room where everything happened. To her relief, there were no bodies here, except that Martin was missing. Alex was sitting with a piece of ice on his forehead. Michael was sitting across the table, staring at the table. He was as if in a trance, although it was only alcohol intoxication. "Where's Martin?" "Concerned?" Emma asked, approaching her husband. "And you're only interested in him again?" Alex answered angrily. Were his eyes blazing with rage? "No, he just left," interrupted her father. "As soon as I got him up, he took his things, got dressed, and went out. How could you send him away in this rain?" Emma was outraged. "And the fact that he attacked you in front of me didn't bother you at all? Or don't you care that you have a husband? Oh, I'm sorry, he's so rich. Surely he could provide himself a brilliant future." Alex was outraged. "What are you talking about? He was drunk." Emma defended Martin. "That's an excuse. Now you're going to make excuses for him. Even though what he did was ridiculous, he treated me with respect. I've never heard so many compliments from you in my life. And he said so many nice things in one night, and for those nice things. Were you ready to sleep with him? My husband couldn't take it anymore. I didn't expect that from you." With these words, Alex stood up, took his coat, which was hanging on the back of his chair, and left the house. Emma rushed after him, but she could only see the glint of headlights running away into the darkness of the night. "Yes," Michael said. "I didn't expect such a turnaround from this evening." "Daddy," cried Emma, like a little baby. "What am I going to do now?" She collapsed to her knees and covered her eyes with her hands. Only her faint whimpers could be heard. Then she smelled the odor of booze, and then a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Go to bed quietly," her father said. "You're all hot. You need to go to bed. Tomorrow we'll deal with everything." The girl looked into his eyes, which always possessed some soothing magic of a kind of support. She immediately found a sober mind, got to her feet, and sprinted to the bedroom. "The morning is wiser in the evening." This phrase fit the current situation very well. In the morning, Emma woke up to a wild pain in her head. The first thing she did was to go into Rose's room, much to her dismay. She didn't find her there, but Emma thought it was all just a glitch. Because of her illness, surely her daughter must be downstairs having a quiet breakfast. She decided to go downstairs to the kitchen too. She was thirsty. She was thirsty. Looking out the window, she noticed that her father's car was missing. Concerned, she went out on the porch, looked around, and saw a note carefully taped to the wooden door. It said in sloppy handwriting, "We're off with Rose to change the tire. We'll be back later tonight. We're going for a walk. Don't miss us." That short note was definitely written by the father. He was the only one who could put it down like that without any embellishments. Quick, clear, and to the point. She took it for granted. She went back upstairs to her bedroom. She was worried about Alex. He hadn't been online since last night. What if something had happened to him? He'd left in a state of complete rage, angry about where he was going. Left his daughter, his wife, his stuff, just up and left. Emma decided to take her mind off things, sighed, and turned on a TV show. An hour passed, 2, 3. She seemed to fall asleep, and when she woke up, it was already late afternoon. Father and daughter were still gone. 3. The subject matter kept escalating. She had already written 1,000 voicemails to her husband. He never made contact. She poured herself some chamomile tea and wanted to go to her room again. But suddenly she heard the key turning in the door. Emma was frightened for some reason and immediately hid. The feast was in the kitchen. The sound was unlike the usual sound of her father opening the door, more like when a lock is picked. Maybe Dad had lost his keys, but why would he break down his own door? He would call Emma. Then the frightened woman decided to cautiously look out the window. She squatted down and peered out from behind the bollard. An ambulance with blue lights was standing outside, but the lock was indeed being tried by some men. Emma was terrified, but she tried to keep her wits about her. She quietly went up to the second floor. She locked herself in her bedroom and started calling her husband. He was out of range as usual, so she had to record voice messages on the answering machine. "Honey, I know you're mad right now, but I have to tell you right now I'm home alone. Everyone's gone somewhere. There's people banging on my door. She hesitated as she heard a loud conversation on the first floor. She realized that these people were able to break into the house, so her mother decided to prop her door open with at least a bollard. That would hold them off for a while she did so. At the same time, she continued to talk into the phone. They're already here. They broke into the house. I think it's Martin. God, I'm so scared. Were you right, Alex? Where the hell are you? She shrieked into the phone when she heard the terrible stomping. They were quite close. Emma pressed send on the message and tucked the phone into the pocket of her robe. She was already prepared for the attack. She moved as far away from the door as possible to the window and armed herself with a table lamp. A moment later, two men in black balaclavas burst into the room. They looked like the very real robbers. Only they weren't after jewelry, they were after a living person. Behind her, one approached, and Emma tried to hit him with her weapon. But this guy seemed to be a good shot and almost immediately knocked the lamp out of her hands. She found herself unarmed. Within moments, something was injected into her hands. A cold liquid spread over venom. After a couple seconds, Emma's eyes ran out and she collapsed to the floor unconscious. One guy threw her onto his shoulder and went to the exit. There an ambulance was already waiting for them there, with Martin as the head doctor. This car was just a disguise, and for the neighbors, so that they would not ask unnecessary questions, and further told Emma Tim, taking another sip of black tea. Everything was like a fog. They kept me on some kind of drugs for 6 months. I couldn't walk, talk, or even think for myself. I remember it all like a blackout. It was a living hell. You wouldn't wish it on an enemy. But on the day of the wedding, apparently they lowered my dosage. So when I saw Rose, the girl hesitated. It was as if some gears were turning in her head. She looked carefully at the table, at her hands, and only then raised her eyes to Tim. Wait, she stretched out. How did my Rose show up at the registry office? Here Tim became nervous. On his forehead, protruded under his breath, became cleared. It was all very visible. Tim called out to him Emma in horror. She tensed up too. God, this guy must be one of their gang too. She felt sick to her stomach and her eyes darkened. I'm in on the story too. Finally, he confessed. But don't be frightened, please. I'll explain it all to you now. It was a month ago. I was called on duty to a bar. A police car with blinkers stopped at the door of the bar. Tim got out, tired from his night shift. He saw a drunk who 2 guards were trying to kick out, but they were having no luck. The 3rd guard was already lying on the floor with a bloody nose. That's why the police were called. Tim drew his service weapon leisurely. He approached the drunkard, who was yelling some threatening speeches, and sharply pulled him by the sleeve. He almost fell down, having lost his balance for a couple of seconds. Come with me, strictly said Tim Yanchik, and slowly turned around with a haughty grin. Said, and who are you anyway? Tim didn't bother with him. Shot him in the air. Sobered up and recognized the approaching man as a police officer. Then he turned the man around and was about to handcuff him. Suddenly the drunk kicked him hard in the crotch. Tim was writhing in pain. And at the same time, the scoundrel snatched a gun from him and began to threaten everyone around him. The guards stopped being brave and put their hands behind their heads. And who knows what would have happened if not for one guy who happened to be passing by. He quickly oriented himself, took a heavy rock from the flower in front of the bar, and smashed it on the madman's head. But he did it so carefully that the alcoholic only collapsed to the floor. There was no unconsciousness, no blood, no death. It was just that the young drunk was now lying on the pavement. As soon as Tim got up, he twisted the man around, and he and the guy shoved him into the car after they had done all the paperwork. Tim motioned for the guy to step outside for a smoke. Thanks for your help. I really did. I could have gotten fired for being unprofessional, Tim said. He's lighting a cigarette. What's your name for? What? The guy asked. Tim, just Tim to you. I'm Alex. What are you doing here? That's how they met. Alex told everything about his life to his stolen wife, and that damned thing. When I got that message, Alex told him then, my heart just sank. I was ready to kill myself. You know, I'm an idiot. I left my wife in that position, And now she's been stolen right from her father's house, he lamented. Of course, at that moment I was terribly frightened and started urgently calling my father-in-law. Michael Nikolaevich, your daughter Emma? God, she was kidnapped, shouted Alex into the phone. He was rushing around in circles from place to place, not knowing what to do. More than 12 hours had passed since he'd left home. He was now 2 hours away from this house. There was silence on the phone. Finally, Michael was able to pull himself together and answer. Where did the information come from? She sent me a voicemail. She suspects Martin. Even through the phone you could hear it. Michael's heavy breathing. He was thinking. On the information he had just received. Where are you now? Finally, the man outside his house asked. I left here yesterday and go to the airport right away. Martin will definitely go there. He lives in Washington, after all. Rose and I will be there in about an hour. Keep us posted. Yes, sir. Alex didn't know why he called his father-in-law sir in a moment of danger, but that was Michael's command. He had to become an officer, not a journalist. The boy followed every instruction. He rushed at full speed to the airport and prayed that the Martin had not yet left. He didn't make it. When Alex asked the flight attendant where the plane from flying to Washington, she answered him that the last flight for today was completed. But Alex was not interested in that. Through the panoramic windows of the airport, he saw the plane, near which was parked a rather familiar expensive car Martin. The guy almost bruised his legs trying to get out. And he succeeded. Poor Her tried to stop him, called security, but Alex was already running at full speed to his beloved. He jumped out on the takeoff field and ran as fast as he could, like a good sprinter. The plane was about 50 meters away. He personally saw his poor wife being carried on a stretcher into the private plane. Behind her, Martin's Archer came in and times her. He even seemed to smile evasively at Alex before disappearing from sight. But Alex kept on fighting. He ran and ran as fast as he could. But the nasty time was failing him. It was only a couple of meters away from the plane, which had already removed the ramp and was starting to turn its propellers. As it moved from the place and rolled down the runway, and the police were rushing towards Alex. And instead of helping the man who had his wife stolen, they began to beat him with batons. Alex fell on the asphalt. He was panting. Michael's voice was heard screaming. Stop, but they continued to beat him until he lost consciousness. I came out of the medical coma they put me in to survive only 2 months later. Alex continued, telling the story. It took a few more to recover, as soon as I could walk again. Immediately, I sprang into action and am still looking for ways to save my wife. I'm sure you Timka knows the bloody fiend. I don't know him personally, but the whole town's talking about him. He's getting married soon. And then Tim stopped talking. He put all the puzzles together in his head. So it's a wedding. The policeman was amazed. Yes, with my wife. Alex said bitterly, and I'm trying to find a way to prevent it. There was a long silence. And after a few minutes, Tim said, so listen to me carefully. I have a plan. And what's next? Emma asked. She liked the denouement of the story more and more. Now her passive husband played not the least role here. And then it's business as usual. Alex brings her daughter, tells her what to do and how to do it. She's a fighting girl. I'll tell you, so small and so fearless, just fire, not a little girl. Admired Tim Rose. So she bursts into your wedding. And then you know the rest, Tim replied, and exhaled with relief. It was like a weight off his shoulders. But how could it be? I mean, you convincingly didn't believe me, did you? Said Emma. But that was the whole point. You weren't supposed to know all the cards. Not while we were in danger. But I don't believe you risked your life and career for a mere passerby who saved my life. Notice, Tim replied with a smile. It still doesn't add up for me. Where is your husband then? You'll find out tomorrow. After all, tomorrow will be an unforgettable day for you. Too intriguing, said Emma. I'm so tired of all this. Tim only shrugged his shoulders. In response, they drank tea in silence and went to bed. Tim gave the girl his old shirt and shorts. The torn white dresses were thrown in the trash. Those he had to sleep on the sofa in the kitchen. But most importantly, Emma was now able to feel safe and comfortable. It had been a long time since she had felt neither where she slept nor how she did it. She was held as if in a fog. Right now, her head was splitting open, and every muscle felt like it was being twisted, pulling at her with a nasty pain. But this is a strong woman. I ordered myself not to think about the pain. The most important thing was to get out of this foreign, hostile city, to get home, to save herself and her daughter. It no longer seemed strange to her that she was sleeping in a strange man's bed, in a strange shirt, missing men's cologne. The main thing now was that she felt alive, an almost sober mind, her own thoughts. How wonderful that was. She would probably have to undergo special treatment to get rid of the remnants of this crap she'd been fed. But she'll get through it all. For herself, for her family, for her daughter. The next day, Emma woke up with terrible anxiety and a dry throat. She drank some water, but it wasn't enough. Her head ached terribly. She looked in the mirror. A layer of anal cream overnight had wiped away everything. And now the pronounced bruises under her eyes could be seen. No, they weren't bruises from her dosage, but from the drugged doorman. She felt absolutely shattered. Emma saw Tim, who had just gotten up from the couch. He too had a glass of water and then walked over to her. Yeah, the guy stretched out. "You look like hell, sis. How are you feeling?" "My head is pounding," admitted his guest. "Oh, that's a manifestation of drug addiction for sure. But don't worry. You don't need an extra dose for that. There are more humane methods." "Like what?" Emma asked with interest. A silly joke. Repented immediately, Tim. "I don't know exactly what to do in such cases. But I have a gift from my grandmother. She collects all kinds of herbs from my grandmother. She gives it to me whenever we see each other." When he said that, his eyes shone with real love and warmth. I took out a jar of herbs from the cupboard and brewed it all over the kitchen. Immediately, the amazing aroma spread, fresh, leathery meadowgrass and berries of some sort. The two of them finished the whole mesmerized. The kettle, designed for 6 cups if diluted with boiling water. And it did help. And Rose woke up and immediately ran into the kitchen. Mommy, are you here? We made it." "Really, now we're going home." My daughter Emma hugged her brave and little. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay, Mom," replied this amazing child and affectionately rubbed her cheek and Mommy's hand. "Oh, here comes our savior," winked Tim at her. "Grab the yogurt in the fridge, and let's go." "Run where?" Emma suddenly asked. "What do you mean?" "Do you have a meeting today?" Tim smiled enigmatically. "Tim, what kind of meeting?" "Get cleaned up, and you'll find out." Emma obeyed the boy and went to her room to get dressed. Only then did she realize that her clothes weren't even here. She, embarrassed, walked into the kitchen again. "Woo, I thought you weren't coming." "Okay, not a funny joke," Tim said. "I'm not very good at jokes, if you've noticed. Anyway, I got myself a dress for the occasion." A little birdie whispered that you're very fond of blue. Emma nodded affirmatively and continued to listen attentively. "Put on a tracksuit and a jacket. You'll find them in my closet. There's nothing else feminine in there. And a hat low over your eyes for 2. And let's go to the meeting." We'd been waiting a long time, and she suspected who she was going to meet. Inwardly, she prepared for a very serious conversation. She and Alex had left on such a terrible note, and it had been more than 6 months. Emma put on everything they had prepared for her and walked back into the kitchen. Rose had already eaten her yogurt and was ready for a new adventure. But how do you see? Fidgeting in front of her, having changed into this too. Seeing him, Emma just awed in her understated pants. The fat one with the graffiti pattern carelessly shifted, the cap worn backwards. Now he looked more like a street hooligan than a law enforcement officer. With a suit like that, I'm not likely to be immediately recognized as a fugitive cop. He laughed, seeing Emma's bewildered look. "Where are we going?" she asked, recovering from the culture shock. "There's a great cafe not far from here," Tim answered cheerfully. "That's where we're meeting." When they left the apartment, Tim checked several times to make sure everything was turned off. And then he brought a huge backpack full of things. As they walked down the stairs, Mom decided to ask why you need so much stuff in the cafe. The boy was surprised. "This, alas, is not a cafe. I just forgot to warn you." We're not coming back here again. Now not only Martin, but the entire city police force is looking for us. The first thing they'll do is visit my apartment, so I'm not coming back here." "Well, where are you going to go?" The girl Emma wouldn't stop. "Stop asking questions. Please." "All in good time. You'll find out soon enough." They entered an American-style diner. Emma felt like the heroine of a soap opera, although her life for the last 6 months had been somewhat of a horror movie. A hostage victim. Kept on drugs for 6 months. She felt sick when she remembered it. No sooner had they approached the table than Rose burst forward screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." "I'm back." Everyone in the cafe turned to them. Alex only smiled at everyone and sat the restless daughter on his lap. Now it was Emma's turn. When their eyes met across her body, goosebumps ran down her body. She held her breath, and then Alex enclosed her in a tight embrace. They didn't say a word to each other, but it was clear enough. "So I don't want to interrupt your happy reunion, but let us rejoice afterward for a while," Tim interrupted them embarrassedly. "You're attracting too much attention, and we're running out of time." The couple sat down at the table, and Tim sat down with them. "Alex," he said quietly now and then. "Emma," as if that name held the deepest meaning. "How are you, my poor girl? I missed you so much." Barely holding back tears, replied Alex. "I'm so sorry we didn't that night." The guy cut him off. "Don't blame yourself for anything. I was the one who was wrong. If only I hadn't left that lousy night." "Oh, well, we'll talk about it later. I'll tell you one thing. These terrible months have made me realize one thing. No matter how much we fight, no matter how many misunderstandings, it happens to everybody. What matters is that we have each other. I'll never leave you again. You should know how much effort I spent trying to get here, and I got here to save you. Whatever it cost me." Terrific speech. "Ironic," said Tim. "The Oscar bro will rehearse another time. Right now, our problem is we're running out of time. And you still haven't told her about our plan. The thing is," began Alex, addressing his wife, "that they won't let us out of town for nothing. We are wanted. To be exact, you, Rose, and Tim. That's why Tim and I have devised a whole plan." Alex leaned even closer so that the plan could not be heard by prying ears. However, here in this noisy second-rate diner on the outskirts, they had no fear of stalkers. "There's a van in the backyard. It's got ice cream on it. To get out of here without being seen, I took out a sole proprietorship. Basically, pretend I'm a real entrepreneur, driving freight, all that stuff. Unload the whole van. There's a refrigerated truck full of ice cream, and it's got a secret section. Your father and I set it up. They're opening it up. Check, please. It's filled with boxes of ice cream. It's like a refrigerator on wheels, but you're comfortable and warm inside. You'll see, once we're all loaded, I get in the driver's seat and calmly drive us to where we'll start our new life." The plan was as foolproof as a Swiss watch. All the characters in this story played their roles brilliantly. Rose, Emma, and Tim took refuge in the trailer, piled with boxes of the most authentic ice cream. Alex got behind the wheel. Inside the passenger compartment, everything was furnished like in the smallest hotel room. There were bunks, a mini kitchen, and a toilet. You could live here for years if you needed 5-star comfort. Rose was absolutely delighted. "It's just a shame you can't see out the windows." She complained a little, but then she got better. "But we'll go as real spies for the ladies." Emma smiled at her daughter. She was glad this whole nightmare was finally coming to an end. How did you ask her Tim after hours on the road? "I'm good. I mean, I still want to dose, but I realize it's an addiction. I'll get there as soon as I can. I'll see a doctor." Then they slept, then they stopped somewhere and slept. Alex to take a break. It seems that after almost a full day's journey, they were already approaching familiar homelands. "We are already in Utah," Alex joyfully informed them at the next stop. Suddenly, at some point in the journey, the truck accelerated sharply. It was very noticeable. The passengers in the trailer got worried. Tim tapped Alex on the wall. He opened a secret window between the cab and the body. "Alex, where are you going so fast? We're getting there." "Unfortunately, we are not alone. We have time for everything," nervously answered Alex. pressing the gas even more. "We are being chased." "Hold on, don't panic. That's for sure." There were Martin's men. They were following them in a huge armored jeep, and after a while, they started shooting at the tires. That's when it got really scary. "Emma, take Rose and hide behind the closet. Make a barricade of pillows," Tim ordered. While they were doing that, Tim pulled his service gun out of his pocket, causing Emma to have a real nervous breakdown. "What is that?" screamed she. "Gun. Unless you want to die, you're going to have to choose either their life or yours." Tim replied firmly. A real firefight broke out. Alex and Tim were shooting back from the cabin. Emma plugged Rose's ears with her hands and shook in the inner trailer. She smiled at her daughter and told her everything was fine. Alex continued to increase speed, trying to get away from the pursuers, and it seemed that everything was already over. On the narrow mountain serpentine, it became quite bad. The long truck was being tossed back and forth at breakneck speed. Emma prayed silently that they wouldn't drive off the cliff. And then she heard a familiar, nasty voice from the loudspeaker stop the car. "If you don't want to get hurt," it was Martin. Was he there too? And we were very surprised to hear that. It's a pretty dangerous race. Wouldn't he be sorry to risk his life? He'd send his thugs away from them. But the question was unanswered, and the truck accidentally crashed into a roadblock. They rammed the back of the truck and boxes of ice cream spilled onto the road. But that's nothing. At high speed, the truck hit a lamppost, which collapsed right onto the road. It didn't just block the path of Martin's car. It knocked her serpentine. The car dangled for a full minute, spinning and wheeling helplessly over the precipice. And then it went down. There was a massive explosion. Our fugitives watched in complete prostration. Shocked by this outcome, they all ran out of the van to see what had happened to the pursuer's car. And it seems that now these scary people no longer posed any threat to them. "Oh my God, Alex!" I squealed, either from joy or shock. "Emma, what have you done? What have we all done? What's going to happen now?" The boy was tensely silent. He realized for himself what had just happened. It could certainly be considered an unintentional murder, unless one knew the full background of the events. And if you did, then it was a planned murder. That's a whole different story. "Let's get downstairs," screamed Emma in a panic. Maybe they can still help her as best they can, trying to calm her down. "Emma, they can't be helped. They're all dead. Now that creep won't hurt you anymore." No moaning. "Anna, no, it's not that wrong. We didn't mean to. We couldn't kill them. If we hadn't killed them, they would have killed us." Didn't blink an eye. Tim continued to stand his ground. A few minutes later, they called the rescue services. Those, of course, arrested the driver of the perpetrator of the whole situation and safely took him to the police station. Tim. And almost unhinged from terror, the young mother and her daughter were driven to Emma and Alex's home in the center. Alex's trial was not scheduled until 2.5 weeks later. During this time, Tim and Emma visited him every day. In one of those visits, Emma suddenly realized that she really loved her husband. She doesn't need a divorce to settle domestic disputes. And she's not a coward at all to just run away from her problems now. "What's the best shirt for me to wear?" she asked Tim, who was finishing the coffee in her kitchen. "They're all the same." The guy shrugged. "What's the point?" Emma couldn't take it anymore. "This one's milky, and this one's pure white." Tim took another look at the shirts. To him, they were exactly the same. But he tried to lie. "Well, take the right one. It's white. She, on the contrary, is milky," nervously uttered the girl. She had already resigned herself to the fact that Tim thought absolutely nothing in style and colors. "Case number 320 is being heard," monotonously pronounced the judge. "The defendant is accused of premeditated murder of several persons. All the victims died as a result of a traffic accident." The trial lasted 2.5 hours. During all those long and crawling hours and minutes, Emma never once left the courtroom. She was terribly worried about the fate of her husband because her own life depended on it. Alex was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 7 years in a penal colony of general regime. and it seemed that she was about to faint from these cruel phrases. But I think she expected that. She obediently listened to the verdict and left the courtroom with the others on wooden legs. But once at home, she was pissed off badly. How on earth could a man be given 7 years in prison on the condition that they chased him and threatened his safety? Well, first of all, the court doesn't know anything about it, Tim explained to her. And there's no need for this psycho to know. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of associates left. I don't know. They know less, as they say. They sleep better. And Alex, willingly or unwillingly, killed them. So everything is fair here. The girl turned to him unhappily and looked straight into his eyes. You are now, by the way, sitting on his favorite chair. Honey, please be reasonable. Dad stood up for Tim. I understand the stress you've been under. It's terrible. We thought we'd lost you forever. But please understand, Alex was put away for a reason. People died because of him. No matter how bad they were still people. Emma sat next to her father on the couch and pressed her body against his. Then she whimpered into his sweater like a little girl. She wanted so badly to feel the warmth of a loved one beside her. But the most beloved person today was not here. And that's terrible. Handing it in. Finally, the deadline approached and Emma was able to visit her husband. The prison was quite large. When Alex was brought out, she was pleasantly surprised. He looked quite neat in his striped robe. Alex sat down across from her and picked up the phone. Emma couldn't contain her feelings and cried. How are you doing, honey? She asked. It's pretty normal for a prison. I'm not being starved or beaten, so I'm not suffering. How are you doing? We're fine. Rose goes to daycare. I miss bringing Rose here too. I don't want her to grow up without a father. Besides, they say you can get parole if you behave yourself. I'll do my best. That's when they said goodbye. They only had a few minutes to talk. It was very upsetting for Emma. But she was told they gave her more time at lunchtime. The next day, her father called her with a very strange proposal. Honey, I want to make a movie about you, he said about me. Emma was surprised. About all the horror you've been through. Come to the studio today and we'll discuss everything there. And indeed, Michael decided to release not exactly a movie, but a TV show where Emma would tell the whole country all the details of the nightmare and then their consequences. This program instantly gained millions of views and became very popular. The case of Emma and Alex received wide publicity, and in a few months under public pressure, the court decision was changed. And Alex was finally able to be home with his family and even received compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Daddy, Daddy, Rose shouted when she was finally able to see her birth father alive and well. Now they were recognized on the streets. Books were written about their plight, and even movies were made. Emma's story has touched the hearts of many, many people. Some found in it motivation for themselves. Others offered support for Emma herself, who had been through such an ordeal. Here's what respondents to a small survey once said in the studio on a talk show. Emma's story inspired me to be braver, to not be afraid of my own prejudices. After all, if she could get out of the hands of such a villain, out of such hopelessness, then I can solve my problems. They're nothing compared to her family's. And that was the end of it. Tim forever became a full-fledged member of the family Oi, named Brother Alex and favorite Uncle Rose. He retired from the authorities and together with Alex. On the warm southern shores, Alex's travel business. We began to quarrel much less often, and we cemented our union with the birth of another child, and Emma's father became well known and achieved great success in his profession.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Mom didn't cry, didn't get hysterical or numb, didn't start cursing men or touchingly pitying her daughter. In general, she behaved in her usual manner. Sitting down across the table, she reached across the table and stroked Cindy's palm. It was for the best that Cindy saw his true face now and not later. The kind of guy that would leave sooner or later anyway, even at the worst moments in life. If it wasn't for Nancy, it would have been for someone else. Be glad you won't have to regret the lost time and effort. Let's make your favorite lemon cookies for ourselves. Mom, are you kidding me? What cookies? I can't breathe. Cindy sobbed, and Mommy just let her sob, looking on with understanding and involvement. Patiently waiting for the tears to stop, she brought a glass of water and said, putting her arm around her shoulders, "It actually helps a lot in these cases to do something familiar and ordinary. Except for nasty chores like cleaning and washing dishes, of course. My mom hated both, although she loved to cook and could create a culinary miracle from the simplest and cheapest products. I hate doing the dishes and making things clean." Without any caprice, sincerely informed her fans, and frightened fans of free coziness quickly dissolved in space. Cindy didn't work out like Mom. She doesn't know how to stand up for herself, so they take everything away from her. So Robert was taken away. That's what she should do. 6 months ago, Cindy had a happy accident. She was in the right place at the right time, and her humble life changed miraculously. She had just graduated from teacher's college and came to work in a kindergarten. Many old acquaintances were surprised by Cindy's unfashionable choices. At school, she studied well, without much effort, and could have chosen a more prestigious and profitable specialty. Only Nancy's mother, grandmother, and friend were not surprised. They were aware that Cindy loved babies, and babies adored her since Cindy had managed to grow out of baby age herself. It was so, and the calling was pointless to resist. Of course, she will not stop at college, will combine profile studies with work. Cindy was given a junior group of 15 3-year-olds, 10 of them boys, and half of them hyperactive. There's no need to be bored. The whole shift is a roller coaster. Her magical ability to calm children will definitely come in handy here. The 5 little girls in this group are amusingly different. 2 little girls, 2 princesses, and a shy, brooding Jenna. On a walk, some slide off the roof of the children's slide like monkeys, others twirl prominently in pretty dresses, and Jenna gazes at flowers, bugs, and butterflies, trying to remain almost invisible herself. This girl was neither stuffy nor intimidated. She was just cozy enough to ponder alone. After watching her teacher for a couple of days, Jenna decided that she could trust her, and when she felt it necessary, she showed her findings or was the first to bring her drawings. She really loved to draw. Cindy couldn't help herself. Jenna was the one she was most attached to and loved. It was usually Mama who came to get Jenna. She was a small, graceful blonde, a little older than her teacher, gentle, polite, not very talkative. She seemed like an enlarged copy of her little daughter. She raised the child alone. She often looked sad and tired, according to the headmistress. The 3 of them lived together, Jenna, her mother, and her grandmother. But the grandmother had not yet been seen in the kindergarten. The gossip at the daycare center was that she had been against the birth of Cindy's favorite, had persuaded her daughter to have an abortion, and was now fundamentally unhelpful in raising the baby girl. Cindy has become even more infiltrated with the girl. She herself grew up without a father, but in the love and care of her mother and grandmother, never once all her childhood did not doubt. Cindy could have grown up mistrustful and wary, but was prevented by her mother's easygoing nature. Mom was convinced that most people weren't bad. It's just that everyone is very different. Hence the misunderstandings between them. It was Cindy's 3rd month at the daycare center, when instead of Mama Clara came to pick up Jenna, a sturdy, charming brown-haired man of about 25, energetic hand, with gray-blue eyes and a bright, self-assured smile. It seemed to Cindy that he realized he had made an impression on the young educator, and it was even hurtful. Had Jenna's father remembered her? She thought, and in an instant she understood Jenna, Mom, and out loud she said, I can't give my child to a stranger. It's for the safety of the children entrusted to us. Jenna's mom had no warning that someone else was coming for her. No question about it. Her stranger replied magnanimously, pulled out his cell phone, made a call, and said into the receiver, "Clara, here's the most beautiful Mary Poppins. To me, Jenna does not give. Talk to her in your own voice, that I am not a stranger." And I gave the phone to Cindy. Jenna's mom voice came through. "Excuse me, I forgot to warn you yesterday. My brother arrived and asked Jenna to pick him up so I wouldn't have to run like a fugitive from work." Cindy knew that Clara, the accountant, had a strict boss who would rather stay late at work than leave early. Sometimes all the children are already taken away, and Cindy and Jenna are still walking alone on the playground, waiting for their mom. It's good that Clara will have a little rest, and Jenna will not be offended that she is the last to be picked up. And for some reason, it is very unpleasant that the young man is not Jenna's dad. Though that doesn't mean he doesn't have children of his own. And anyway, why should she be interested in that? "Thanks for your vigilance, Cindy," declared the guy with mocking seriousness. "You can be trusted. Come and see Uncle Jenna. Let's go home." At the exit, he turned around with the girl in his arms. "And my name is Uncle Charles. Goodbye, Uncle Charles." With a reserved smile, Cindy said goodbye and forced herself to immediately turn around and walk from the locker room to the group. Don't let him think he impressed her. She sees uncles like that every day. It's so commonplace, and it's a Hollywood smile, like an ad man or a salesman. Anyway, it didn't work out for Cindy. She kept thinking about Jenna's uncle all evening. And tomorrow he came for his niece again. The usually cautious, reserved Jenna ran toward him, spreading her arms. "Uncle, pardon me for asking, is everything all right with Claire?" Cindy dared to ask. "Everything's fine," Uncle Charles assured her. "I just thought I'd relieve my little sister while I'm here. At least let her get away from the daily evening rush to daycare. My contract's up, so I'm just visiting family for a vacation. I don't know how much yet." I don't know how much. He was probably waiting for Cindy to ask him something. What he did for a living where he worked. But Cindy just nodded and said, "Okay, I see," and immediately felt how stupid and boring it sounded. "Oh, I almost forgot," slapped himself lightly on the forehead of the guy. "This is for you," and held out a box of expensive candy. Cindy and her mom used to get them on holidays. "Thank you." Cindy was surprised. "What's the gift for?" "In honor of our acquaintance." The boy smiled. The next day he brought roses, 5 big cherry roses. Jenna jumped, satisfied with the gift of her favorite educator. Without having time to find the right words, the uncle picked up his niece, promised, "See you tomorrow," and went out the door of the group. Cindy, after a little thought, took the flowers home and told her mother about the new acquaintance. At least he's not a greedy bastard. Mom laughed carelessly, admiring the bouquet. The flowers are gorgeous. Now so many men do not give flowers, even funny to say, consider a woman mercantile for the desire to get a bouquet or drink a cup of coffee in a beautiful coffee shop. They make the stupidest conclusions. Yes, I will always support a man in difficult moments. Do not reproach, share all the hardships, but I do not intend to do it for a known bogeyman. One good thing, you can see them right away. Oh, I got distracted. Mom loved a lyrical digression, as she called it. She didn't share the details of her personal life with Cindy, but she enjoyed thinking out loud, so you could more or less understand what she was going through. Mom had a happy streak. She was always interested in life, even if life was not very smooth. Most likely, It was because of this that she looked younger than her years and all her classmates. Despite her modest income, she did not hover in the clouds, but just a little soaring above the asphalt and lawns. "Do you look surprised and confused?" she asked Cindy. "Why should I be? It's just business as usual. A young man has decided to court you classically. That's not a bad thing. As long as he's not married. I don't advise you to get involved with married men." "You're so pretty, Cindy. Girls have been guessing since they were kids, and you're like a hesitant, modest girl. Just a piece of antique window dressing. A modest beauty." Mom always managed to make me feel confident that everything was going to be all right. The next day, Charles came for Jenna again and took out from the inside pocket of his jacket 2 rectangles of theater tickets. "Let's go to the theater on Saturday, shall we? I mean, really, I just want to ask if Cindy would be willing to go out with me." "We could try," Cindy said, "and we have a really good theater." On Saturday evening, Nancy dropped by, caught Cindy packing, and rounded her eyes with amusement. "Wow, you're putting on a dress. Something unusual has happened, and your best friend doesn't know." The mom who heard this snickered and disappeared somewhere. Cindy was a little confused. Her friend guessed the events even on an empty place, and here was such a material proof. Cindy was a stay-at-home mom. Could on ready-made patterns or on orders, coordinated to the smallest detail. Could with the connection of his own imagination, when the client himself does not know what he wants. Clients were very different. They paid not only with money, but also with primitive natural exchange, as my mother called it. One girl sewing a business pantsuit partially paid with a piece of artificial tie silk. Mom had not been warned of this turn of events. She was counting on the full amount in cash. She and Cindy were just having another dieting spree. That was Mom's expression, too. It's what she called a period of no money. But the girls' times were the same, and she hoped to get out of them by going to the interview, sewing Cindy's mom's suit, and getting her dream job. Informal pay, but it would do. Mom agreed, stroking a narrow section of smooth, navy-colored fabric. And in 2 days, she sewed the girl an elegant tweed suit, and the daughter a simple, elegant dress. Coco Chanel had a little black one and Cindy will have a little turquoise one, she announced. "It looks good on redheads. Mom, it's a masterpiece." Cindy exhaled sincerely, turning around twice in front of the mirror. "But now I have to figure out where to wear it so as not to offend him." "Oh, if only there was a dress, and the occasion will be found," Mom assured me. Nancy tried to borrow the dress once. She was counting on it, but it was made to Cindy's exact measurements. "Nancy, I'll be sure to sew something to fit your tantalizing thighs." Cindy was comforted by her mother, and the dress was waiting on the shoulders in the closet faithful, the only mistress. Now Nancy examined Cindy and made a quick judgment. "I'll assume you just haven't had time to tell me what's new with you. But now you're just not going to get away with it. Nothing much has happened, or you'd be the first to know." Cindy assured me, and it was true. Cindy and Nancy had been friends since kindergarten. Ever since Nancy's parents had come to town and put their daughter in preschool. No one could explain why such different girls had become such good friends. But they hadn't even quarreled once. Somehow there was no reason. Self-loving Nancy, named so in honor of her grandmother, suited her very well, this rare name. There was something icy about it. If their school had been casting for the role of the Snow Queen, Nancy would have been chosen. No one could blame her for anything. She didn't get mad at anyone. She didn't fight with anyone. She didn't gossip about anyone. Nancy was not perfect. She simply had little interest in other people. For a select few, she made an exception. Among them was her childhood friend Cindy. Nancy's mother was very pleased with their friendship. In her opinion, when Charles called, Cindy was long since ready. They were sitting in the kitchen. Mom and Nancy were drinking coffee and chocolate chip cookies, and Cindy was just waiting and trying to appear casual. "I'll be right out," she promised into her phone and looked out the fourth-floor window into the street, followed by Nancy. Charles parked in the driveway, got out of the car, looked up. An Audi. Nancy said, "I wonder if it was a credit car." Everything was going great, as Mom would classically define it. After several years of working in the North, Charles had planned a vacation at his folks' place 2 months. Then he had Bern in his plans, especially since it wasn't far away. He had already bought a studio on the outskirts 2 years ago and had been renting it out all this time. Now he would ask the tenants to vacate the apartment for the landlord, live and look for a job in Bern. Toward the end of his 2nd month in his hometown, Charles made one more item in his plans. One Saturday evening, he unexpectedly came to visit with a bouquet and a cake, met his mother, and immediately announced, "Evelyn, I have serious intentions. I want to marry Cindy. I'll be honest with you, we'll have to wait. I have to find a job in Bern that will provide for my family. I'm used to good wages in the North, but it's harder to find that kind of work in civilization. If I can't find one, I'll go back on shift. I need a bigger apartment for my family instead of a studio. You're a sensible man, Charles. That's not a bad thing. But I'm guessing this is the first time Cindy's heard of your plans together." That was the plain truth. Cindy was caught off guard, and she was no good at pretending. In those 2 months, she had fallen so self-consciously in love that everything else in her life had taken a back seat, seemed unimportant. She felt so good that she was afraid to think about the future, so as not to jinx it with her plans. She had never been superstitious before, but now she was. She dared to look, only very far away. Robert was going to Bern. They would call each other. He would come for the weekend as promised. She would wait and rush the weekend. For how long? She tried not to think. "I wanted to talk to you and Cindy at once." "Cindy, will you be my official bride?" "I will," Cindy said. She had imagined it differently, but she was still very happy. She wanted to hug Robert, but was shy in front of her mother. He was sitting solemn too, like a headmaster at a banquet. "I'll bring the ring from Bern. There's no good jewelry shop here. I'm sorry it was so awkward. We realize not everything can be calculated and planned." Cindy's mom calmed him down. A spontaneous decision isn't always worse than a well-considered one. "Am I lucky to have a mother-in-law?" Charles exclaimed. "With a mother-in-law you are," Mom assured him. "And I'm all for total non-interference." "Yes, Mom is," confirmed Cindy. Even her voice seemed unfamiliar to her. It was more melodious today, because everything was singing inside. Charles could have gone to Bern without this offer. She had not expected anything like this from him. It wouldn't even occur to her to take offense that he wouldn't promise anything. It turns out he really cares for her. He wants her to know that he is serious on his part and to wait for him. Being a bride makes the waiting different. It makes it so much easier for her to wait. And the next week, just before Robert left, it was her birthday. Charles had booked a banquet at a cafe for Cindy's closest loved ones. At their side were her mom and Nancy. The groom came with his mom and sister and Jenna. "Cindy, you were prepared to meet your future mother-in-law on your birthday, were you?" Nancy whispered to her. "Actually, I was," Cindy admitted. "But if Charles wants it that way, I don't mind. By the way, it's your birthday," Nancy reminded her. Jenna almost stayed in Cindy's arms. It was the first time she had ever been to a banquet, even a small one. All her celebrations had been at home and at daycare. She looked with interest at the decorated table and the beautifully folded napkins. Cindy Mom found an approach to Robert's silent mom, and they talked about fabrics. Mom was generally good with all kinds of people, but she liked her privacy best. Clara, Robert's sister, looked tired, but she tried to seem cheerful and lively. Like she should at a birthday party, she praised Cindy in front of her mom. Does she really like me, and is she so nice? Cindy thought gratefully. Nancy walked from table to bar to chat with the bartender, a Chinese man who had been brought to their town and to this bar by some unknown wind. She would gracefully sit down on a stool, showing off her beautiful legs, and the bartender should have been grateful to her. Visitors from the neighboring room began to pull up to the bar, obviously because of the white-haired, unruffled beauty. You and your friend look nothing alike. Robert's mother, who was watching Nancy, told Cindy. Of course, we're not sisters. Cindy laughed. She would have liked to spend the evening alone with Charles, but it was all right. Jenna is interested, though. She'll probably spend a few days drawing everything she's memorized. Charles gave Cindy a new cell phone for her birthday, and 2 days later he left for Bern. And the usual routine began. Cindy tried her best to get away from work, to switch. She even tried once again to learn sewing from her mother. Do you miss her that much? Mom asked understandingly. Yes, Cindy admitted. I didn't even expect myself. I thought that such feelings were invented for novels to make them more interesting for women to read. I was sure I'd live in peace. Look how confident she was, not with your jeans. Mom smiled. In consolation, I can say that I had strong feelings, and I do not regret it at all, and I am very glad. Charles came every week at first, then became every other weekend. Cindy knew it was hard to spend 12 o'clock on the road after a work week and then drive back a day later. Sometimes you just need to sleep at home and not be disturbed. Charles invited Cindy to his house for New Year's Eve and to show her around Bern. Sometimes you need a change of scenery. Cindy was careful to tell her mother. What would she say to that? Cindy, you really are an antique. Do you think I'm going to talk you out of it? No, of course not. We're not in Victorian England, and you're not a schoolgirl. You're a grown-up, independent girl. It's bound to happen at some point. I'm glad for you that it's not too soon, and as it happens, but for love. It's important, believe me. Cindy believed her mother. She was sure, without any proof, that her mother understood love. Who are you going to spend Christmas with, Grandma? Once upon a time they lived in this little apartment. The 4 of them, Grandma, Grandpa, and Mom and Cindy. Cindy didn't remember Grandpa very well. He had died early, and Grandma had lived with them for a long time. 2 years ago, she had come from the market and told her from the doorstep that she had met an elderly gentleman there who had selflessly helped her carry potatoes and other miscellaneous root vegetables home. She wouldn't have bought so many if the gentleman hadn't come along. She decided to take a chance. Grandma's acquaintance turned out to be a resident of a neighboring town. He had a house in the private sector, where he lived alone. His children lived and worked in Bern and rarely came to visit. His wife had died a few years ago. Christopher had come here for a friend's anniversary, and now he promised to visit more often. Grandma said flirtatiously. Cindy and her mom laughed and forgot about it the next day. Christopher wasn't kidding. He came to see Grandma, and one day she asked her girls for permission to bring him to visit. But Christopher and I aren't students to wander the streets or go to restaurants. He tries to take me out for tea and cakes somewhere. But you can't sit for hours in a supermarket, and we're not interested in the movies. We want to socialize. Of course, Mom and Cindy invited Christopher. He turned out to be a nice man. This ex-physics teacher, a man of rare manhood. He introduced himself with a chuckle. He no longer taught at school, but ran a technical club for children at the local cultural center. It was obvious that he adored his grandmother. He didn't show it on purpose or hide it. Cindy thought it was a little funny at the time, but her mother said she was just a young girl. 6 months later, Grandma and Christopher decided to move in together. Cindy and her mom were invited to visit at Christopher's house, so that they could have peace of mind that Grandma would be living in decent conditions. The house really turned out to be good and even well maintained. Christopher could do everything himself, including women's work. Mom said that she was calm for Grandmother, giving her into safe hands. To Grandmother and Christopher will still have time. Mom answered Cindy's question. And at Christmas, I was also invited to the dacha by a good friend. To be honest, I just wouldn't go if you stayed at home. I would prefer your company. And this way I'll have a romantic Christmas too, maybe. So thank you, daughter. Have a good time in Bern. Cindy and her mother laughed together. She has a wonderful mom after all. Nancy is jealous. You can't talk to her mom like that. You have to choose your words. You can't say the wrong thing. You have to be decent at all times. You have to live by the rules, even the rules your mom doesn't follow. You know what she likes to say? When you're my age, you can do whatever you want. A young girl should behave herself. Where did she get that nonsense from? Nobody thinks like that anymore, only her. Your mom cares what you think and feel. Mine cares that no one can say anything bad about me. That's how we live. I can understand if I was to be married to a millionaire or a sultan. Sultans are millionaires too. Cindy put it in. Uh-huh, continued Nancy, who was not easily thrown off course. So I say there's no point in looking to public opinion. Nobody really thinks about us. Talk for 2 minutes and forget it. Everyone's busy living their own lives, and yet I'm still in the habit of acting the way I used to. Although I'm not under any illusions about meeting a millionaire. Ethan, the hardware store owner, is probably my ceiling. Cindy made no secret of her sympathy for poor Ethan. He'd been a devoted admirer of her friend for almost 4 years. Ever since he'd seen Nancy in a scarlet floor-length dress walking with Cindy from the prom. But while to someone like Cindy's grandmother, Ethan was a decent, serious guy and even a successful businessman, to Nancy he was plain, boring, and rude. But he didn't realize it, because although she argued with her mother, she behaved as she should and didn't get outspoken. Cindy went to Bern for Christmas, and she had never had a happier Christmas, not even as a child, when everything is magical at Christmas time. In the afternoon, Charles would show her around the capital. In the evening, they would go back to his little studio and be alone. Charles said he hadn't made any friends here yet. He only worked, and on weekends, he either went to Cindy's hometown or just slept and watched TV series if he was too tired. Cindy would wake up in the middle of the night and make a wish. They would have friends in Bern when they lived together. They would have a very cozy life, and it would be nice to visit them. Cindy helped to choose presents for Robert's mother and sister, and for Jenna, and she also had to drive them. She was a little surprised that Charles didn't want to go to the family by himself. We could spend half the vacation in Bern and half at home. Cindy, I'm exactly at home here. What's there to do there? Where would you and I meet like this? I don't think we'd be able to spend so many nights together. Ma and I aren't exactly close, if you've noticed. I love her, sure, but we don't have much to talk about. Clara likes to whine. She gave birth to Jenna, no one forced her to, and now it's like it's someone else's fault she's having a hard time. Of course I feel sorry for her, but feeling sorry makes you tired. You're just tired. Cindy hastened to justify him. She would find something to say to his mom, Miranda. Think of something to make them feel good. Everyone gets tired sometimes, even those closest to them. True, Cindy couldn't remember her and her grandmother or her mother ever getting so tired of each other, but men must be different. Sometimes you have to leave them alone so they have time to miss each other. She knows too little about it yet. I wonder how Mom is doing. When she wished them a Merry Christmas, her voice was carefree and happy. Cindy sometimes felt that Mama was the same age as she was. The Christmas holidays had passed. The usual dark routine had returned. The calendar hinted at spring, but it didn't look like spring. Charles visited Cindy and his family less and less often, after 2 weeks or even 3. Cindy understood, or seemed to understand, but she was restless, anxious. The winds rattled the windows at night, and it seemed to sleepless Cindy that it was bad news knocking at the house, which was hidden from her during the day. Weekends without Robert seemed long and useless. Nancy had somehow become a little distant. She had her own things to do. She had even stopped demanding details of Cindy's personal life. Cindy imperceptibly became friends with Clara, Robert's sister. Clara came to visit with Jenna. The girls drank strong tea with a spoonful of homemade herbal balm, a gift from Grandma Christopher, and her mother read Jenna a book or played with her. It was a little funny and very unfamiliar to have someone address Mommy as Baba Evelyn. But it didn't make the mom herself sad at all. Baba is the child's degree of trust. You silly girls, the girls weren't so stupid. They realized that Cindy was pleased that Clara and Jenna were frequenting their house. It was like Charles was getting so close, and Charles said at every call, "Thank you for your consideration for my girls, Cindy." Mama always admonished them to come by more often, and Robert's mom was slow to invite them over. She's that kind of person. Cindy was reassured by her own mom, and by the way, it's even better. Most likely, she is not interested and does not need to know everything about you. Watching you, controlling you, snooping around, it'll be easier for you if you ever get married. Mom said that in the kindest of ways, without innuendo or double meanings. But Cindy still didn't like it, if ever. Nor was anything else unequivocal, after their promises and arrangements, and all the wonderful things between them. In the spring, when the morning was still cold to gloveless hands, but the parks were already filled with pale green smoke from buds barely bursting on the trees, Cindy had been sent to Bern for a conference. A face-to-face conference for child care providers and educators. Probably some of the family child care providers would have liked a change of scenery and a trip to Bern. But the superintendent sent the free Cindy, who was very sympathetic. Young responsible specialist for all the time of work without conflict with the parents of the pupils. Just the fiancé in Bern, they will see each other. Cindy decided to go without a surprise call. They had not seen each other for more than 2 weeks. An unexpected meeting will make her even happier. "Clara, please don't tell your brother I'm coming. I want to show up out of the blue, surprise him." Clara was silent for a moment, hesitating. And then she asked, "Are you sure, Cindy? Shouldn't we give him a little warning? Do you think your brother would be angry if he saw me? He says he misses me all the time. I don't ask him to. You're right, don't mind him. As my mom likes to say, I'm just very sensitive." The conference started on Monday, and Cindy arrived in Bern on Sunday evening. She took a cab from the subway to Robert's house. She had so many homemade pies and pickles with her. She wanted to catch her breath a little from the road and to look pretty to Charles, not tired. Cindy paid the driver and got out of the cab at the corner of the house. There were roadworks further along, patches on the pavement, and it was a bit of a walk. A couple was saying goodbye at Robert's front door. A shapely girl in a light, unseasonable mini dress and a half coat thrown over her shoulders, with white thick hair down to her shoulders, was kissing a young man on the lips who lightly embraced her below the waist. She broke the kiss, but continued to stare at her companion. It was Charles, slightly wrinkled and pleased with himself. "Should I say hello to your country girl for you?" Cindy heard a familiar voice, playfully melodic, almost flawless. What is she doing here? Nancy laughed softly, turned away from Robert, and faced Cindy. "There you go. One leaves and one comes in." She wasn't confused, but she didn't wait for an answer. Nancy was leaving in no particular hurry, in her usual gait, what Cindy's mother used to call a catwalk walk. She had known her friend too long and well. She was convinced that Cindy would not run after her, could not bring herself to move. Cindy's travel bags were frozen in her hands, and she had to at least put them on the pavement to lose all their weight, and her fingers wouldn't stretch, wouldn't obey. Charles, as if nothing had happened, took hold of the handles of the bags and pulled them toward him. "Let's take them and go home." Cindy obediently followed him as if in a fog. In the elevator, she stood looking at her feet, or in the corner, unable to look up at Robert, as if she were afraid of seeing someone else entirely. In the apartment, she sat down on the edge of a chair on the corner of the table, her back to the disassembled sofa. "Bunny, I didn't think you were such a child as your charges in the younger group." Charles addressed her condescendingly. "It's not like you and me, pure physiology. We don't see each other much. I'm a healthy man, and I have needs. I was sure you would realize that, and not come without warning, so as not to embarrass me and yourself. I would never have let you run into each other here if I had known. I'm not afraid of you coming without warning any time," Cindy replied. "Zai, that's why I'm marrying you. You have all the qualities of a good wife. This is your pseudo-girlfriend, with pleasure spend time, but only idiots marry them. Yeah, you're not an idiot. You want a country girl at home who's easy to fool. Zai, don't mess with my head. It doesn't suit you. People like her just want to assert themselves at the expense of others, at least to make a mean comment to someone more fortunate. And you fell for it like a little girl." "Yeah, she gets leftovers, and she convinces herself that she's beaten someone." Cindy listened to him. She dares to look up. He doesn't think he's wrong. He sees himself as a gift, a prize being fought over. I guess it's good to be like that, as long as there are fools like Cindy. She stood up and picked up a smaller bag from the floor. "Here's your other one with the pies in it, and the winter cooking." Charles, with a conciliatory smile, blocked her path by the front door. "Don't be silly, Cindy. Where are you going for the night?" "To a hotel. I have a departmental reservation. I'm here for a conference, not to catch you red-handed." "Wow, we're so strict. Are we rehearsing an insulted wife?" "Let me through." "Yes, come in, of course. I'm a beast. When you cool down, call me where you're staying and when we're free. Let's go out after my work and your conference." He was smiling in a friendly way. It was funny, he didn't even think to hide it, or at least play remorseful. Cindy didn't even have tears. It was like a stone had been placed on her chest. She decided not to call her mom. She wouldn't help anyway. She'd just get upset. She'd think a lot, think in silence, and so order slower. At 7:00 p.m. the next day, when she had just returned to her room, Charles called. Cindy had agreed with herself yesterday that she would not answer the phone, but she broke her promise. People change, People change, realize things, even overnight. You can't rule out that slim little chance. Charles suggested businesslike when she gave him the address where to pick you up. He didn't doubt it at all. She realized wryly. People don't change, you just get to know them better over time. But maybe he was just pretending to be so cynical. If he didn't care about Cindy, he wouldn't be calling now. He'd be taking the opportunity to get rid of his annoying friend easily. Why all those emails and postcards? The calls, the gifts, the introductions to families. He loved her, she couldn't be wrong. She wasn't some posh, unapproachable socialite to win her over out of ego. So he does love her. She just didn't know how to express it the way Cindy wanted to. She gave the address. Charles arrived, quickly, brought a bouquet of white lilies, suggested they go to the premiere of a comedy. He was the same as he'd always been, joking confidently, opening the door with a warning. Cindy wondered if he was pretending, or if he really didn't see that she seemed frozen or petrified now. He was chuckling quietly at the movie, enjoying the evening. And Cindy didn't care much at all about what was happening on the screen around her. "Shall we go home?" he suggested lazily after the movie. "Let's order delivery for dinner, a bottle of wine." Cindy was silent, remembered the Nancy front room, the disassembled bed. "I can't go there yet. You know, this hurts me, and you don't even apologize, even though it's so easy. Just because I love you doesn't mean you can do this to me." "Here we go," Charles said curtly, wrinkling his nose. Everything was fine, and now it's back to this kindergarten stuff. Really, your element is kindergarten. You're in the right profession. He turned and strode leisurely to the car. Cindy could hardly restrain herself from rushing after him. She was afraid. Even his back showed that he might be gone for good, and she could do nothing about it. She can't hold him back, make him regret what he's done and apologize. She can't do anything. She's a hen. She's a hen. She's a pussycat. She's a hen. Nancy's right. The third day of the conference was over. Cindy was going home. Charles still hadn't called. It's a good thing that Mom and Clara, not to disturb her and at the wrong time, didn't call her, but messaged her. It's easier to reply there that everything is fine. The voice in the text is not audible. Before the train, Cindy stopped to buy a small gift for Jenna and went to the train station. Just as she was settling down on a side shelf and the platform slowly floated past, the bell rang. Charles. I ran to the vestibule, tripping over other people's legs, stretched out into the aisle, as if I couldn't answer it in the car. I thought it would be better to speak to you directly, so that there would be no misunderstandings, so that you wouldn't make up things for yourself. Robert's voice sounded soft and almost indifferent. For some reason, Cindy remembered a Methodist at a conference, tired from the presentation and the buffet. You and I shouldn't continue our relationship. I was wrong, I admit it. We're not right for each other. You're over-dramatizing life, and you can get tired of it quickly. We'd both get bored, and if I'm feeling it now, you know there's no point. You can keep the presents, be happy. Say hi to my family, I'll come by sometime. He said that text and dropped the call. That's what it's called, dropping the call. That Mom's quietly sad expression. Cindy knew it well. Mom, you knew this would happen, and you didn't say anything to me, not once. I'm like an old crow that just wants to caw. I didn't like Charles very much, but my opinion is just my opinion. I'm entitled to be wrong, and it's not that uncommon for me to be wrong. Why would I want to ruin the best parts of my life? There were good things, weren't there? There was. Cindy exhaled. Well then, it's all good. And there's nothing to regret? There was and there will be. Not with him. Do all men look at it that way? Why would I even want to be in a relationship? Come on, don't generalize. They're as different as we are. It's true that fidelity isn't for everyone. Things happen in life. I haven't judged anyone in a long time. But a good, decent man behaves differently. If his girlfriend, especially his fiancée, caught him with someone else. Of course, when he loves someone, even if he doesn't love her anymore, he still behaves differently. And you realize it yourself. Sometimes a guy is an incorrigible womanizer, but he's a good person. In Robert's case, it's not the cheating that matters, it's how he behaved afterwards. You got rid of such a piece of dumb daughter. It's worth celebrating. I lost my friends too, Mom. Nancy and I have never had a serious quarrel since we were kids. We trusted each other, and now, even if I wanted to, I couldn't even trust her in the smallest things. It wasn't an accident that she came to Bern to see him. It's deliberate. And Clara herself won't want to keep in touch with me after her brother and I broke up. Nancy wasn't a friend, she was just a traveling companion. People like that are friends when it suits them. If it's not favorable, they'll kick you in the head with their boots and move on. No one to regret either. Clara is not a stupid girl, though her mother and brother think otherwise. She'll figure out who she wants to hang out with. If she distances herself from you, it's because she's embarrassed about her brother. It happens to people with a conscience. Someone else did something bad, and you're embarrassed. When do you have to go to work? Mom could jump from one topic to another in a heartbeat. Cindy was used to it, but sometimes she couldn't keep up with Mom's thinking. Monday, today's my arrival day, and tomorrow is my day off after the conference. Going out of town for a weekend of sadness. Or if I'm lucky, not even sad. The friend I spent Christmas with has a cottage in a magical place, almost in the middle of the woods. There are snowdrops in the sunny spots. Mom, you've never introduced me to your friends. Is there something serious here? Just a man I'd love you to meet. His name is No. It's both serious and not serious, a little bit of everything. Anyway, I'm welcome to visit with my daughter, my mom or Christopher. There's a dog and 2 ginger cats. Oranges, tangerines. Let's go. Charles was going on vacation. It was the first time he'd ever been so lucky. He was going on vacation alone without his wife. His wife, having received an invitation to a friend's wedding in Spain, got excited, packed up and flew away, picking up the speed of the Boeing from the very threshold. Not even for the sake of decency do not offer your husband to keep you company. He asked. Nope. The wife shook her head. There will be ours, our yoga course. You are not interested, and I deserve a vacation and complete relaxation. And I want to see a real Spanish wedding, Spanish mother-in-law, and other highlights. And you can go somewhere to make up for it. Does your dad know you need a vacation? And she flew away happy and contented. It was even annoying that he wasn't jealous anymore. Letting her go on vacation alone, just to have a vacation without her husband. They hadn't been together that long. Charles married the daughter of the technical director of a small company with which he worked as a development engineer. They met at a summer corporate retreat where employees could bring a family member with them if they wished. There was a lot of people. Contests, fireworks, dancing to pops, all sorts of nonsense for the accountant's amusement. A full-figured but bright, confident brunette came up to him as he was bored at the bar on the open veranda. What kind of cocktail would I like? She wasn't exactly Charles's type, but if she showed interest, it was indecent to ignore the chance. Charles ordered another cocktail. We drank and danced. I'm going out for a minute, the girl said after the dance. Stay here, don't leave. While your lady goes to powder her nose, I'll tell you something. The mocking voice of David's colleague sounded behind my shoulder. So you don't get too excited. It's our boss's daughter. The only favorite, spoiled, does not want to work. She studies here and there. She'll sigh, it's not my thing. She'll go and live in Vietnam, go and study something new again. Dad dreams of marrying her off. She'll be 30 soon. For him, that's the age when girls should be worried about not getting married. I'm talking to you because that's not the best butterfly for your herbarium. Charles managed to say a big thank you to David, only mentally. He grinned and disappeared into the crowd of cowworkers, barely noticing that his companion was returning. If Charles had had any interest in Molly, it had diminished with the news of her parentage. It's better to play the right nerdy careerist to make Molly bored and switch to a more interesting object. You can tell she's a gambler. The careerist turned out Charles not badly, even talented in some places. There's a reason he was in good standing with the company. But that damned careerist Molly, too, had taken a fancy to him. She preferred to think of herself as a romantic, but in fact she was determined, strong-willed, and tenacious. Charles, who liked to set the tone in relationships and get the girls talking, felt driven for the first time. Molly had asked for his phone number herself when she left the corporate party with her dad, and she'd called him herself, never doubting that he'd welcome the call. She could call in the middle of the day. We talked about cars, boats. Charles was invited to go fishing in a narrow circle, in which revolved quite closed, serious John. There was a lot to think about. He seemed to be seen as a future son-in-law. His relationship with Molly was a protracted fling. Charles just didn't want to complicate his life for fear of unintended consequences. In the eyes of Molly's parents, he clearly looked like a well-mannered, serious young man with moral principles who needed more than just a bed. It would be very funny if it wasn't happening to him. Charles, a week before the fishing trip, read several thematic sites and bought himself the right equipment and the right spinning rod with which it is not ashamed to appear in a serious fishing community. He enjoyed fishing as a hobby. He was looking for an upside to his position, and that's the first thing that came to mind. Basically, he just wasn't planning on getting married yet. He was quite happy with the advantages of being single, but if he reconsidered his plans, things were looking up. The second such chance for a guy from a small town, from the most ordinary family, may not be. Without the right acquaintances and favorable kinship, he expected only routine work and slow career growth. That is, if in an office with business trips without a shift, and he didn't want a shift anymore. Charles liked comfort. If he was honest with himself, the prospect of marrying Molly, say, the daughter of the head of the security department, suited him just fine. Gray, with a heavy chin and the look of a school vice principal, would be a really dull option. Molly is bright, draws male attention to herself, and on the whole she is a good-natured, cheerful girl. If you don't look at the little things, Charles was well aware of what embarrassed him the most. He couldn't stand feminists and seriously believed that most of women's woes are from their influence. He makes the money and dictates the rules. He envisioned his wife as a pretty, gentle girl who owed him a lot and recognized his dominance. He'd had one once, almost 3 years ago in his hometown. It seems it was in another life. Cindy's kindergarten teacher, cozy knave. He actually almost married her, thought she was just right. If I'd gotten my hands on her girlfriend, who was playing hard to get, the hunter's appetite kicked in, and his girl was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw them. And she walked around with such a reproach in her eyes and seriously waited for repentance, though she had looked him in the mouth before. Charles saw the devil in a quiet pool and changed his mind about getting married. He had achieved everything on his own, not to have his standards imposed on him. Now here we go. He was definitely not going to live by his own rules. Charles hadn't decided overnight Friday and Saturday what line of behavior to take at the informal meeting. John, his two friends, and his cousin greeted Charles cordially and did not show their superiority. Late in the evening, when the company drank and dined in a cozy shooting cottage, Evgenevich called Charles to the terrace and asked directly to you seriously with Molly. Just honestly explain like a man to a man. I'll understand. I love your daughter. John stated, Charles, whatever happens, and what's the holdup? She's waiting. It's just a fashion for girls to be independent these days. In fact, they're waiting for a man to take the initiative. You know that without me? I'm not a boy anymore. I realize I can't give her the standard of living she's used to. Caught the Charles part. I'm afraid I'm falling short. I don't want to look like a slick, provincial Alfonso. It's not for me. I realize Molly deserves someone more successful. Look how proud we are. Okay, I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. Now I'll tell you. My daughter has my character. It doesn't matter to us that you're not status. It's all gonna come if you want it to. And you have it. I can see that, and I'm gonna help you. I care about my daughter's happiness, not what anyone thinks. I don't work for myself like Papa Carlo. When you have kids of your own, you'll understand. Molly never wanted to get married. She's never wanted to get married, but she wants to marry you. So don't hesitate and don't procrastinate. Propose. My mother and I will organize any wedding you want. You can have 300 people, or just the two of you in the Maldives. Thank you for your understanding, John. Just as long as it works out. That's how Charles got married. Molly didn't want a crowded wedding. She wanted a modest ceremony and a romantic exotic cruise. Weddings are only for drunken guests and hackneyed plots, she said. Charles was grateful to her. First of all, he was bored by crowded gatherings. Second, he realized that his mother and Clara would look out of place against Molly's friends and peers, who were groomed and carefree. Poor, simple relatives of a provincial Alfonso. And no lavish wedding, there is no demonstration of their kin. Charles called home and announced that he was getting married. They would go on a wedding trip, and then they would stop by sometime to visit with gifts. Since then, Charles has never gotten around to stopping by even by himself. Mom came to visit a couple of times at their new apartment. She liked her daughter-in-law, sociable, friendly, energetic. Her son listens to her, and he's very much in favor of control. You can see that. That's what Mom told Charles. He even listened calmly, did not object. His wife really is a good influence. At the airport, looking for his flight on the electronic board, Charles stumbled, stepped on something hard, and almost twisted his foot. He cursed quietly, looked under his feet, and saw a child's wooden cube with letters on it, almost identical to the ones he had as a child. This one rolled farthest away. A thin, red-haired girl was collecting the other cubes in a box a little farther away. He hadn't thought of her in 1,000 years, but he recognized her immediately. Cindy, my goodness. She hadn't changed a bit. Still busy with her children's toys. Well, that's to be expected. She straightened up, looked around for someone Charles hadn't seen. He took advantage of it, jumped up quietly from behind, handed her the ill-fated cube from behind her shoulder, and suddenly in a stern inspector's voice, asked, "What is Cindy suddenly doing at the airport on a weekday?" Accompanying a daycare center on a tour of the uncles of the pilots and aunts of the flight attendants. Cindy shuddered slightly, barely noticeable, and turned around. Confusion and bewilderment flashed in her eyes for a few seconds, but was immediately replaced by a calm smile. "Cindy rests sometimes." With a softly indifferent grin, she replied. She ignored the tactless prank. Charles wanted suddenly to continue the conversation and embarrass her after all. But Cindy saw who she was waiting for. A little girl with a mop of auburn curls and bright red sneakers was running toward her. Behind her came a panting, cheerful girl and a preschool boy. "Mom, it's okay. We're all cleaned up and everything is fine," the little girl reported to Cindy in a ringing voice. "Good for you, Foxy." Cindy laughed. "Take the cubes, put them in Mason's backpack, and don't look in anyone else's backpacks." I played customs with Mason. I found the little girl right away. She looked just like Cindy. Same thick hair, same clear skin with a few freckles. Only her eyes were not light brown, but blue, not almond-shaped, but almost round, big, and mischievous. You can already see that she will grow up to be very beautiful. Charles suddenly thought, "Thank you, Kathy, for putting this gang in order." She turned to her friend. "And I met an old acquaintance while I was waiting for you." And she gave Charles a polite nod. "We should go. Have a nice vacation or business trip." "And to you girls," Charles nodded. The friends separated the children, taking each of them by the hands, and went to the baggage claim line. Somewhere in the middle of the line for the Bali flight, an elderly woman with suitcases was waiting for them. I wonder if he was just choosing between Cyprus and Bali, but he chose Cyprus. It would have been funny if they had flown to the same resort town. But we didn't. And probably, with children choose other resorts, as John likes to say, will be their own children, you will understand. Where did you fly away, carefree, funky mood? Handed over the suitcase, sat at the bar with cognac and coffee. It seemed that at the opposite end of the hall still flashed this four, moms with children. Cindy the girl, about 5 years old. As far as he understood about children, they'd said goodbye just about 6 years ago. He could very well be her father. And his eyes. What's he getting so worked up about, though? There's no such thing as eyes. And if the child had been his, he would have been informed. Sister Clara, who never forgave him for dumping her girlfriend and won't even meet his wife or Cindy herself. But how does it usually go? "Let's make up. Love, we're having a baby." Or her mom or his mom. At least as a warning that they might sue for child support. Nobody said a word. It doesn't work that way. So there's probably another option here. Cindy was looking for comfort after they broke up. And here was someone seriously comforting. That's fine. It's better to think that way. Anyway, she's not poor now. She's off to the seaside with the baby. When they met, she'd never been further than Bern. Charles had no intention of thinking about Cindy any further. He was trying to play a game. To guess which of the spicy girls in his line of sight was going where he was going. But the guessing game didn't distract him. There were no really interesting girls in sight, and he kept looking for a familiar silhouette. She had changed. No, she didn't look older. She was still just like a girl, a freshman. Light, graceful. There was a calm confidence about her, and something else elusive that made her stand out among the others. Yes, she'd always had good taste. But it was less and less frequent now, and that was unlikely to change. At least she should be able to enjoy her vacation. Molly called from Spain several times a day, counting nighttime, if she suddenly became sad at night, or on the contrary, wanted to immediately share her impressions. To have an affair in such an environment, when at any time can be a video call from his wife, only to fray his nerves. In Cyprus, Charles suddenly realized that he was really tired, and if he hung out not in a bar, not on the beach, then on a fishing trip. In the company of a quiet local uncle of age, John's father-in-law. Charles was even a little scared that he was enjoying this kind of vacation. Is he getting old or something? somehow very early for this return to Bern, with fishing bikes for John, and normal life went on. For the next year, Molly drove him crazy with mood swings. They couldn't conceive. It got to the point where she decided to see a doctor. She hated going to the doctor. She made an exception for the dentist and presented it as a sacrifice for beauty. Going to the gynecologist was even harder for her. Charles waited doomedly for her to share the details, but breathed a sigh of relief. Molly had suddenly stopped sharing, whispering only to her mother. While she waited for the results of the tests, he did not forget to give her duty signs of attention and did not ask about anything, just to continue to leave him alone. But one day she came not like herself, fell back in the chair, and said with a tremor in her voice, "I have no chance." Here Charles rushed to comfort her, just as she had expected. He did feel a little sorry for her. She wasn't a bad girl. It wasn't fair that she was so unlucky. He said that doctors sometimes make mistakes, that they would still hope and try. You know, all the things you're supposed to do in cases like this. He himself was not depressed. He had no burning desire to have children. To be honest, he saw no tragedy in life without them. The only fat disadvantage he saw was that, without children, Molly would have to take care of him and control him. After another year, Molly, having consulted with Mom and Dad, voiced Charles' decision. They would adopt a child, or rather adopt a child. She wanted a girl. Charles, accustomed to show firmness, but from fright remembered the past and answered categorically and adamantly no. "Don't even try to approach me with that proposition again. You've grown up like a greenhouse flower. You don't know life, you have no idea what genes these rejects might have. I don't really believe in upbringing when there's been 7 generations of marginalized people. No matter what you do, the genes will show up. No, that's all." He was sure Molly wouldn't leave him because of that. She loves him too much. She'll whine from time to time. But he'd put up with that. He thought his marriage was pretty successful overall, better than most. Then, in the late fall, a vaguely familiar, melodic female voice called out to him at the mall. "Oh, Charles." He turned around. He remembered her not at once, but he remembered her. A perky girl with a rare name, Nancy, who had once wanted to wrestle him away from her friend Cindy. She'd really grown up. Pretty, boring, respectable, and by the looks of it, well-to-do. "Hello, Nancy. You look good." "Oh, come on. It's just a courtesy. I'm waiting for a friend. I've been through the galleries twice. If you're not in a hurry, let's have coffee." "Why not? Let's do it." We sat down in a cafe. He only took coffee. Nancy also took cognac. "I'm fine. I don't drive. I'm not good at it. There are people like that." "My husband drives me. It has its advantages. It's convenient, yes. You live in Bern?" "Yes. We moved here 5 years ago. Everything's fine. By the way, Cindy lives here. Your ex-fiancée and my ex-girlfriend. I know that from my mom. I shouldn't have looked at you the other day. I just lost a good friend. But I'm okay with that. It's been a long time. Do you have a wife, children, or are you a love tramp, Casanova?" "I have a wife, no children. Not that I know of, anyway." "Well then, you don't know much," Nancy remarked without a trace of schadenfreude. "You really don't know, or just don't want to know." Charles had already guessed what she was going to tell him. "Our Cindy has a daughter with you. Lisa. She's already in school. You'd have to be such a principled girl like Cindy not to ask you for child support." "I don't think it's my child. My mother or sister would have told me." "Mother, I suppose. If someone had told her, Clara would know, but her friend asked her to keep quiet. When you and Cindy split up, she moved to Bern a couple months later. got a job at a private day care center. Some friend of her mother's, Aunt Evelyn, helped her, then she married him. Imagine that. And my mom also has a friend at our women's health clinic. She told me that Cindy came to see them and that Cindy was pregnant. It's definitely your baby. When it comes to Cindy, you can be sure. So Cindy and Aunt Evelyn didn't say anything to anyone. It was just a quick getaway to Bern. Cindy left. She gave birth here, and she lives here. I don't know her address. I don't know her phone number, Daddy. Why are you telling me this now? I don't even know. Someone must have told you. You decide whether you need this information or not. Nancy laughed softly. Another 6 months passed. Spring came. Molly had lost weight from worry. Charles had always found thin people more attractive, but his wife didn't like thinness. She'd even forgotten his adamant statement about adoption. She kept asking, demanding, crying. But one day she met him from work, soft, calm, and thoughtful. After dinner, she made them both a cocktail, sank quietly into a chair and said, "You already have a child, so you don't want someone else's. You don't even ask where I went for 2 days. You're not interested. I went to your sister's. I've been wanting to meet her for a while, so I thought, why not now? They're both great sisters and nieces. I got it out of Clara that you had a kid. You know how hard it is to get rid of me, don't you? No. I'm not gonna fight. That was way before my time. On the contrary, I have something good to offer you. Don't laugh. I've given it a lot of thought, and it's a good thing. Why don't you meet my daughter? Why don't you come and visit us on the weekends? We'll give her gifts, support her financially, just be friends. We'll have a child in the house, and it won't be someone else's child. I know it's not uncommon for a girl to be friends with her stepmother. She's so pretty, your daughter. Clara showed me a picture of her, and very capable, as Clara says. She's a quick learner. Her mother will be very happy that they suddenly have support. Molly and myself found out 6 months ago by accident that I had a daughter. You may not believe it, but it's true. If her mom needed my support, she wouldn't have kept me in the dark for so many years. She's a different kind of person, a little weird. Clara told me how you two broke up. Tried to be unemotional, smoothing over the facts, probably felt sorry for me. It's not for me to judge you. I had 2 abortions when I was young, and now I have no children. So as far as moralizing goes, that's not for me. If you're uncomfortable talking to your daughter's mom, I'll talk to her. Maybe it's better that way. I'll be honest, I'll explain everything, she'll understand. I'll be Lisa's aunt like Clara. Molly, I always thought you were a practical, reasonable woman, at least adequate. Why do you have such crazy ideas? Well, find yourself a hobby. Don't obsess about the kids. That's ridiculous. If you worked like me, you wouldn't have time to think about nonsense. Aunts, uncles, have you ever thought how stupid I'd feel in this situation? Like you think a lot about my feelings yourself. She wanted to say something else, it was obvious, but she kept quiet. Well, it was great that she had learned to stop, at least for a while. Cindy and Lisa were returning from a sports, ballroom dancing class, walking leisurely. Lisa was enthusiastically telling her news, demonstrating at the same time the new moves she had been working on today. It was very difficult for her to stop right after class. The instructor noted her flexibility and plasticity. The day is warm today. The sun is already warming them, not just shining on them. In the playground outside their house, away from 2 local grandmothers with strollers, a strange woman sat on a bench. When she saw that Cindy had spotted her, she stood up and walked toward them. A well-groomed brunette with a beautiful tired face, not a single wrinkle, but you could see that she was a grown woman, not a student, but definitely not one of the moms or other relatives of the children from her daycare center. "Hello, are you Cindy and Lisa?" Greetingly, but somewhat tensely, she asked. "Yes, my name is Cindy. This is my daughter." Cindy replied in her tone, but a little wary. This didn't seem like an official visit. "Cindy, do you have a moment to talk privately? Can we talk here?" "Lisa, take a little walk around the grounds. Please chat with our neighbors." "I won't be long." "Okay." The girl replied with a curious glance in the direction of the stranger. "I'll be around if you need me." The brunette smiled, escorting her with an attentive look, and hurriedly introduced herself. "My name is Molly. I'm the wife of Charles, Lisa's father." There was a careful silence between them for a moment. Cindy broke it gently first. "All right, let's get acquainted. I won't even try to hide my bewilderment. Why do you need us?" "If we haven't threatened your family's budget so far, we won't. I realized that a long time ago. That's not why I came to see you. I wanted to ask you to let Lisa meet her father. Has Charles become so shy over the years that he needs an intermediary?" Cindy laughed softly. "If he suddenly wanted to communicate with his daughter, he would have come himself. All the more reason for you to mediate in such a matter. I can see he hasn't changed. He's as indifferent to the feelings of women as ever." "I'm sorry, Molly. No offense. Just the facts." Cindy felt a strange sympathy for her new acquaintance. From Charles's wife, there was no hostility, no sense of superiority. She did not scrutinize Cindy, did not evaluate her, did not compare her with herself. She just looked at her expectantly and thoughtfully, choosing her words. "Cindy, this is going to sound strange, but I would be glad to have my husband's daughter in our home. I have no children of my own, and he doesn't want an adopted one." She fell silent, giving herself pause again to choose her words. "I think I understand. I don't need to explain further." Cindy stopped her. "I'll tell you a platitude. Doctors sometimes make mistakes. I work in a kindergarten. I know many such stories. Every daycare center has a kid whose mom thought she was infertile. Hope for your chance. The attitude helps a lot. As for Lisa, I am getting married in a month, and for Lisa, my future husband is her daddy. She doesn't even question it. By the way, neither do I. Imagine if this were your child and your situation. What would you do?" Yeah, I'm not coming back. Sorry for the stupid idea, the time wasted. I'd have a very different conversation with me if I were you. And I'm sure you'd understand, too." Cindy replied, "Thank you." Molly nodded. She turned and walked toward the parking lot, waving to Lisa as she went. "I felt sorry for myself at first," Cindy thought, looking after her. "I've never been as lonely as she was, though. Sebastian won't arrive from his business trip until tomorrow. Lisa is already asleep, and she's not sleeping a wink. No, there's nothing to be afraid of course Charles won't come. He didn't like to complicate his life, and he was hardly in love. When they parted, Cindy was no longer lying to herself. She was in love with a man she should stay away from in the first place. How could I have been such a blind fool? She asked then, telling her mom. It wasn't even her mom. It was a question of space, but Mom was answering. If we were smart in love, humanity would have died out long ago. Convincingly she answered, so that doesn't speak to your personal stupidity. It's just the way things work. And I've had that happen to me. What do you think? See, I'm alive and enjoying life. I don't think I could ever really enjoy anything again. And it seemed to me the main thing is you don't force yourself. You don't have fun, not sincerely. You want to wear mourning for love, then wear it. It will end on its own, you'll see. Maybe psychologists would burn me at the stake, but that's what I think. Cindy believed Mom. Mom was not only her own psychologist, but she was also a psychologist to others. Cindy was sure that many of her clients had been coming to her for years, not so much for a closet makeover, but for a chat. They talk to their mom and see that their problems are not so terrible and insoluble. And then came a series of happy coincidences. Mom introduced Cindy to her wonderful friend No. No's older sister Camille was the head of a prestigious private daycare center in Bern and was visiting. And she lured Cindy to join her, even after she learned she was pregnant. Cindy had doubts at first about how she would be alone in Bern with a baby. Camille reassured her. "Not alone. We're already family. Your mom and my brother are about to get married. I live alone in a big apartment as it happens. I can't stand being alone. I'd be glad to have your company if you don't like it, or if things don't work out. You can always go home." Cindy was a little shaky. She wasn't ready to leave her mom, her junior group, Jenna. She wondered how Camille would feel. Her mom gave her a shocked look. "Don't think I'm kicking you out by deciding to start a new life, but I'd go if I were you. You should try it. It's not just that fate throws up such coincidences to make it easier for you to start over." That's how Cindy ended up in Bern. She lived, worked, raised Lisa, and a year ago, she met Sebastian in a supermarket, accidentally putting a chicken in his cart instead of her own. And it was the last chicken on sale. We laughed. Cindy was already married to Sebastian for 3 years when she found out she was expecting a baby. She went to the antenatal clinic to check in and bumped into Molly at the entrance. She had put on a lot of weight, but it suited her. "Oh, Cindy," she cheered. "Look, you were right. You must be a good witch." She pointed to her prominent belly, and Molly looked different, glowing with a contented calm. "I'm so glad you and Charles are doing well." Cindy said sincerely, "I'm fine, but I have no idea about Charles. We don't talk. I've only been with him for, 2 months since I met him. I tried like a stubborn jackass to get him to adopt a girl from the orphanage. He even stopped calling me by my first name, just Hen. They say I'm obsessed with the desire to have a child. I'm limited, and I really already had something like insanity. I'm used to getting what I want. Of course, it was hard on me. Charles had a young girl. I didn't feel anything special when I found out, but I felt sorry for the girl. I met her and drew a verbal portrait of our mutual Charles out of female solidarity. By the way, we are still friends with her. And Charles she left not immediately, of course, but the main thing herself. I gave up. I decided to get away. I went on vacation alone so I wouldn't have to see his perpetually disgruntled face. And there I had a resort romance, and I suddenly saw thanks to him, and my husband does not love me at all, and I do not love him anymore. I was wrong about him. I'm weird. Why should I be surprised? So I came home and got a divorce. He even quit his job out of fear, as if my father would hurt him. He never would. My dad's the wrong man, and my resort fling turned out to be a serious love affair. Who knew? And now I'm about to be a mom. I'm pretty sure I know the real reasons why Charles and I didn't have kids. He didn't love me, not at all. And it worked for some reason, like contraception. Everyone laughs at me, even my mom. One old doctor said, "Yeah, she's seen cases like this before. I'm not the first, and she believes me. If it feels right, it's right. Bring your baby to our daycare later." Cindy smiled. "I was just going to say, I'll bring my baby to your daycare center." Molly laughed. "I'm having a son. You don't have to wait so long. Come visit us with your husband." And they exchanged phone numbers. Cindy went home happy. She remembered Molly sometimes, and it was a sad memory. It was nice to know that another person's life had changed for the better. It seems like they're definitely going to be family friends. If that's how I feel, that's how it is.